My name is Lorelei Sterling. I was exactly 18 years and 8 hours old the morning my mother smiled at me, slid a cup of black coffee across our kitchen island, and asked me to sign away my dead father's life insurance. She didn't say happy birthday. She didn't ask how I felt about crossing into adulthood without him. She just tapped her manicured fingernails against the granite counter, handed me a pen, and told me we needed to talk about the money. She thought she had me cornered. She thought a grieving teenager would simply fold under the weight of a mother's disappointed stare and hand over $2.4 million to save the family reputation. But here is what my mother didn't know. 8 hours earlier, at exactly 1 minute to midnight, I had sat in a high-rise law firm in downtown Las Vegas and legally locked every single penny inside an irrevocable Nevada asset protection trust. She was smiling at a vault she could never open. I took a slow sip of the coffee. It tasted bitter. I looked her in the eye and asked her what she wanted to talk about. It would take her 2 days to realize she was already bankrupt, and another week to figure out she had done it to herself. Welcome back to Fluffy Revenge, the channel where quiet women finally stop paying the bill for other people's mistakes and family secrets meet the bottom line. If you have ever watched someone perform affection just to see what they can extract from you, this story belongs to you. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are listening from, and be sure to subscribe. Let me take you back to the night before, to the 42nd floor of a building overlooking the Las Vegas Strip. The digital clock on the mahogany conference table clicked to 11:59 p.m. Below the floor-to-ceiling windows, the neon lights burned in a grid of constructed desire and calculated losses. Up in the boardroom, the only sounds were the steady hum of the climate control and the scratch of a fountain pen against thick, textured paper. I held the pen. In 60 seconds, I would legally become an adult. Initial the bottom of page 14, Lorelei, Mr. Adler said. He sat across from me. He was a gray-haired estate attorney who treated silence as a billable asset. This establishes the corporate trustee. Once the ink dries on a Nevada asset protection trust, the walls go up. The principal becomes a ghost to outside claims. I pressed the nib to the paper. My father had spent his life building a logistics company in the shadows of the Nevada desert. He converted freight routes and sweat into a secure inheritance. He taught me how to read a balance sheet before I learned to drive. More importantly, he taught me that the state of Nevada offered the most impenetrable financial privacy laws in the country. It was a legal haven designed for people who understood that bloodlines rarely guarantee loyalty. The clock shifted to 12 a.m. Midnight. My 18th birthday. I signed my full name on the final line, executing the transfer. Every dollar my father left me moved into the irrevocable vehicle. I set the pen down. The vault was locked. Mr. Adler gathered the documents. He placed them in a thick leather portfolio and snapped the clasp shut. The sound was definitive. It meant the money was no longer mine to give away, even if I wanted to. I was merely a discretionary beneficiary now. If anyone demanded cash, they would have to fight a corporate entity that did not care about family guilt trips. I thanked Mr. Adler, took the elevator down to the quiet street, and drove back to the Henderson suburb I called home, knowing the real test was waiting for me at sunrise. 8 hours later, the desert sun breached the arched windows of our kitchen. I sat at the island with a textbook on market liquidity open in front of me. The house smelled of espresso and expensive vanilla. It was the curated scent my mother, Victoria, preferred when she was managing her environment. Victoria stepped into the kitchen wearing a silk robe and a camera-ready smile. She bypassed the espresso machine, poured a mug of black coffee, and walked toward the island. The ceramics scraped against the granite as she slid the cup toward my textbook. "Happy birthday, sweetie," she said. She stopped at the edge of the counter. I kept my eyes on those pages. Victoria rarely poured coffee for anyone. She rarely smiled before 10 in the morning unless she was staging a scene for an audience. I noted the tension tightening her jawline. I watched the way her fingers tapped an irregular, anxious rhythm against her silk pockets. "I let you sleep in," she continued. Her voice carried an artificial warmth, sweetened just enough to hide the hook. "But now that you are officially 18, we have some adult business to handle." I turned a page. I let the silence stretch between us, a tactic I had learned from watching contract negotiations. I watched the steam curl from the mug she had pushed into my space. When you grow up in a house where affection is conditional, you learn to spot a collection attempt before the invoice arrives. Victoria had been circling this day for a year. I had watched her plant the seeds, dropping casual comments about family unity and shared burdens. Now she was ready to harvest. Victoria leaned over the granite. Her smile dropped its soft edges. It hardened into something sharp-focused and purely transactional. "We need to talk about that money," she said. The chill hit me instantly. It was not fear. The funds were secured behind a legal fortress she could never breach, managed by an independent corporate trustee who would reject any request she tried to make. The cold feeling blooming in my chest was the raw, clinical realization that my mother's sudden affection had a precise market value. She was standing in my kitchen, projecting motherly warmth, expecting to collect a payout. I did not panic. I retreated into the clinical detachment my finance professors taught me to use when evaluating a hostile merger. I did not yell. I did not ask her how she could do this on the morning of my birthday. I just looked at the textbook, then at the coffee, and finally up at the woman who saw her own daughter as a line of credit. I picked up the mug. The coffee burned my tongue, grounding me in the physical moment. I was ready to let her speak. I wanted to hear exactly how she planned to justify stealing my future. I was an auditor, and I was about to open her books. The coffee in my mug had gone lukewarm, its surface a dark, undisturbed mirror. I set my cup down on the granite island, ensuring the handle sat perfectly parallel to the spine of my textbook. "What money, Mom?" I asked. My tone remained mild, layered with the exact amount of naive curiosity a sheltered teenager ought to display. Victoria released a soft practice sigh. She pulled out the leather-backed bar stool opposite mine and sat down gracefully, crossing her silk-clad legs. She leaned forward, bridging the physical distance between us, adopting the posture of a confidant, preparing to share a vital, exciting secret. "Your father's life insurance, sweetie," she said. Her voice lowered into a soothing, collaborative register. "The trust principle. Now that you are of age, those funds are legally yours to direct. And heaven knows we have been waiting for this day. This family has a unique opportunity right now, a chance to consolidate our resources and secure our legacy. Consolidate our resources. Secure our legacy." The corporate buzzwords dripped from her lips, sweet and entirely hollow. She spoke of family wealth as if we were a board of directors, ignoring the reality that she had never contributed a single hour of labor to the empire my father built. "An opportunity," I repeated, tilting my head. "What kind of opportunity?" "Family investments," Victoria said smoothly. She reached across the counter and covered my hand with hers. Her skin felt dry, the metal of her rings pressing uncomfortably against my knuckles. "We are a team, Lorelei. When your father passed, he left a void. We have struggled to keep the Sterling name where it belongs. But your brother is on the verge of something brilliant. We just need to pool our liquidity to get him over the finish line." As she spun her vague narrative of unity and triumph, my mind drifted away from her words and moved directly to the ledger I had been silently keeping in my head for the past 12 months. I did not need her to explain her financial position. I had already audited our lives. People leave a trail of breadcrumbs when they are running out of cash, and you only have to pay attention to see the deficit growing. The pebbles of ruin had started dropping late last autumn. The first indicator was the country club. For a decade, my parents had maintained a premier membership at a notoriously exclusive golf enclave in Summerlin. It was Victoria's favorite stage, a place where she could sip martinis and network with the wives of casino executives. In November, she abruptly downgraded our status to a social membership, forfeiting the golf privileges and the private dining room access. When I asked her about it, she waved a dismissive hand, claiming the chef's quality had declined and the clientele had become tedious. A month later, the physical assets began to vanish. An antique French credenza that had anchored our foyer for 12 years simply disappeared on a Tuesday afternoon. When I came home from a lecture, the space was filled by a cheap modern replica. Victoria told me she was updating the aesthetic of the house, embracing minimalism. 2 weeks after that, a set of silver candelabras quietly vacated the dining room. You do not embrace minimalism by pawning inherited silver, but I let her keep her fiction. Then came the mail. The postal carrier used to drop our letters into the brass box at the end of the driveway at exactly 2 in the afternoon. By February, Victoria had developed a sudden, anxious habit of waiting by the front window. She would intercept the carrier before he even reached the property line, shuffling the envelopes with quick, nervous motions. On the rare occasions I fetched the mail first, I noticed the return addresses. Final notices. Delinquent property tax warnings. Envelopes stamped with bright, aggressive red ink demanding immediate attention. Victoria would snatch them from my hand, laughing breathlessly, muttering about administrative errors and lazy accountants. I did not ignore those warning signs. I analyzed them. I compiled them. And all the data pointed toward a single, unavoidable liability: my older brother. Declan was 26 years old, blessed with our father's commanding height and our mother's effortless charm. He was a charismatic void, a man who navigated Las Vegas society on the strength of a blinding smile and an expensive haircut. But Declan did not merely fail at business. He failed with spectacular expensive flair. While I spent my evenings studying market trends and corporate law, Declan spent his chasing the next effortless fortune. He launched a cryptocurrency advisory firm that evaporated in 6 months, leaving behind a trail of angry investors and empty leased office space. He started a luxury car rental service for high rollers, which folded the moment the insurance premiums came due. Every time his house of cards collapsed, Victoria was there with a checkbook quietly settling the debts to protect the sterling name from public embarrassment. She bailed him out, dusted him off, and funded the next delusion. Declan sold potential, and our mother was his most dedicated buyer. But the well had run dry. My father's corporate accounts had been locked away in probate, and Victoria's personal allowances had clearly been exhausted keeping up the facade of wealth. The definitive proof of their desperation arrived 3 months ago. I had stayed up late finalizing a finance paper, wandering into my father's old home office to find a specific reference book. The room was dark, but a sliver of moonlight caught the edge of a crumpled paper resting near the brim of the leather trash bin. My father had taught me to read everything, so I smoothed the paper out on the mahogany desk. It was a commercial loan denial letter. A regional bank had formally rejected an application for a 7-figure line of credit. The applicant was a holding company managed by Declan. The guarantor listed was Victoria Sterling. The rejection reasoning was brutally clear: insufficient verifiable income and inadequate unencumbered collateral. Standing in the dark that night, smoothing the creases of that rejection letter, I understood the timeline. Victoria had run out of avenues. She had exhausted her credit, pawned the antiques, and leveraged whatever she could. Her entire financial survival hinged on a single upcoming date on the calendar. She had been holding her breath, treading water in a sea of debt, waiting for the morning I turned 18. She banked her future on the assumption that a grieving daughter would sign away her inheritance without reading the fine print. I blinked, pulling myself back to the present moment in the sunlit kitchen. Victoria was still holding my hand, still waiting for the grateful, compliant response she expected. "Pool our liquidity," I echoed, keeping my expression neutral. I gently pulled my hand out from under hers and picked up my pen, tapping the plastic casing against my textbook. "That sounds like a complex strategy, Mom. What exactly do you mean by talking about the money? How does Declan's breakthrough involve my trust fund?" I was deliberately handing her the shovel, inviting her to dig the first layer of the trap. If I accused her now, she would retreat into maternal outrage. She would cry, deflect, and twist the narrative to make me the ungrateful child. I needed her to commit to the lie out loud. I needed her to lay the paperwork on the granite counter so I could dissect it. Victoria's smile tightened just a fraction, a micro-expression revealing her frustration that I had not simply offered her a blank check. She smoothed the silk lapels of her robe and adjusted her posture, projecting an aura of weary responsibility. "Your brother has secured an exclusive contract," she explained, her voice dropping into a serious, hushed tone. "A logistics technology patent that will revolutionize freight tracking across the West Coast. It is exactly the kind of venture your father would have championed. But these tech deals move fast, Lorelei. The initial investors require a show of faith, a backing of tangible assets to release the development funds." She paused, letting the silence hang, expecting me to fill it with offers of help. I simply stared at her, my face a blank canvas. "We are facing a slight cash flow bottleneck," she continued, her tone shifting to breezy confidence. "It is a temporary hurdle, just a matter of transferring some capital to bridge the gap until Declan's initial public offering next year. You will earn a remarkable return on your investment, sweetie. Far better than letting that money sit stagnant in some boring index fund." She was lying, and she was doing it poorly. A patent requires years of development, and public offerings do not happen overnight to cure a cash flow bottleneck. She was speaking in disjointed corporate fragments she had likely overheard at a dinner party, hoping I was too young to understand how a real equity structure operated. "A bridge gap," I said, my voice steady. "And how much of a bridge does Declan need?" Victoria hesitated. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, a brief flash of anxiety breaking through her polished exterior. She reached into the deep pocket of her silk robe. She did not produce a business plan. She did not bring out a prospectus or an executive summary or any document resembling a legitimate investment opportunity. She pulled out a folded sheaf of legal paper, crisp and heavy, bound by a single silver staple at the corner. She laid it flat on the granite island, smoothing the creases with the flat of her palm. The document rested right next to my coffee mug, white and glaring under the kitchen lights. I looked down at the document resting on the granite island. The paper was bright and rigid, the kind of heavy-stock law firms use to make terrible ideas feel legitimate. Victoria kept her palm pressed flat against the top edge, framing the moment with an air of reluctant necessity. She had pitched me the glittering illusion of my brother's technology patent, but now she needed to set the hook. A phantom tech company rarely motivates a daughter, but a childhood home in jeopardy carries real weight. Victoria's smile faded into a calculated mask of vulnerability. She withdrew her hand and wrapped both arms around herself, shivering slightly in the climate-controlled air. "The patent is the future, Lorelei, but we have an immediate crisis," she said, her voice dropping to a fragile whisper. "Your father left a complex estate. There are obligations he hid from me. We owe a balloon payment on this house by the end of the month. If we do not execute a financial consolidation right now, the bank will initiate foreclosure. We will lose the home you grew up in." She let the threat hang in the quiet kitchen. Financial consolidation. She delivered the phrase with rehearsed smoothness, trusting I would hear the panic in her voice, rather than the structural flaw in her logic. A true consolidation reorganizes existing debt under a single lower interest umbrella. It requires appraisals, underwriting, and weeks of bureaucratic friction. You do not finalize a residential mortgage consolidation by sliding a single stapled packet across a kitchen counter on a Tuesday morning. I reached out and pulled the document toward me. My father used to sit at this exact island with a yellow legal pad teaching me how to read vendor contracts. He always told me that the bold print at the top of a page was designed to make you feel safe, while the fine print at the bottom was designed to strip you to the bone. I did not look at Victoria. I looked at the bold print. It was not a residential mortgage modification. It was not a deed of trust for our Henderson estate. The header read "Commercial Guarantee" in stark black letters. I flipped to the second page, my eyes scanning the dense blocks of text with trained efficiency. The borrower listed was Sterling Innovations, LLC. A corporate entity I knew Declan had registered mere months ago. The lender was not a traditional commercial bank, but a private mezzanine finance group operating out of a suite in Reno. These were not the kind of lenders who cared about a family's legacy or a residential balloon payment. They were apex predators who specialized in high-risk, high-yield debt lending to desperate people at punishing rates. I traced my finger down the margin, searching for the principal amount. I found it buried in the third paragraph. $1.5 million. My mother was not asking me to help cover a missed mortgage payment. She was asking me to personally guarantee a seven-figure commercial credit line for a shell company with zero verifiable revenue. I continued reading, delving into the covenants. The document was a masterpiece of legal entrapment. It contained a sweeping cross-collateralization clause. If I signed my name on the final page, I would be pledging every dollar of my liquid assets, present and future, to secure Declan's debt. If my brother missed a single payment, or if the private lender arbitrarily decided the technology patent lacked market viability, they could declare the loan in default. The lender would bypass Declan entirely and seize my inheritance to satisfy the balance. Furthermore, the contract included a waiver of notice, meaning they could drain my accounts without even sending me a warning letter. It was a financial death sentence disguised as a family favor. Victoria shifted her weight on the bar stool, the silk of her robe rustling against the leather. She was growing anxious in the silence. She expected me to glance at the total, shed a few tears over the prospect of losing our home, and blindly sign the signature block. She did not expect me to audit the covenants. "It is just a formality," Victoria said, attempting to break my concentration. She reached out to tap the signature line on the final page. "The lenders simply need a secondary guarantor on record to release the initial capital. Declan's patent will generate enough revenue to retire the debt before the first quarter ends. You will never even notice the liability on your credit report." I looked up from the contract. I met her eyes, searching for any trace of maternal guilt. There was none. She was entirely consumed by the mechanics of the transaction, viewing me not as her daughter, but as a convenient source of pristine credit. She was willing to feed my entire future into the furnace of Declan's ambition just to delay her own financial reckoning. "This is a commercial guarantee for $1.5 million, I said, keeping my voice level and calm. Sterling Innovations has no operational history, no audited financials, and no tangible assets to secure this kind of leverage. The interest rate is prime plus 8%. This is predatory debt, Mom." Victoria stiffened. Her posture went rigid, the fragile, concerned mother routine evaporating in an instant. Her eyes narrowed as she processed my vocabulary. She had anticipated dealing with a naive teenager, but she was sitting across from a student of finance who recognized a toxic asset. "You do not understand the logistics of venture capital, Lorelei." She countered, her tone sharpening into condescension. "High-yield ventures require aggressive initial leverage. Your father understood this. He took risks to build his company, and now it is time for you to step up and support your brother. Family protects family. Family does not ask family to sign a blind guarantee with a cross-collateralization clause," I replied. I closed the packet and slid it back across the granite counter until it rested near her coffee mug. "If Declan defaults on this line of credit, the lender can legally seize my entire inheritance. I would be wiped out." "Declan will not default," Victoria snapped, her voice rising in defensive anger. She slapped her palm flat against the document. "How can you sit there and assume your own brother will fail? We are trying to save this house. We are trying to save the life your father built for us, and you are acting like a cold, calculating auditor." "I am acting like an investor being asked to assume uncompensated risk," I said. I folded my hands on the table, maintaining my clinical detachment. The more she pushed, the calmer I became. It was a defense mechanism, a way to insulate myself from the profound heartbreak of realizing my mother was actively trying to ruin me. "I do not sign legal instruments without a thorough diligence period. I need 48 hours to review the prospectus." Victoria stared at me, her lips parted in disbelief. "Review the prospectus, Lorelei. This is your family, not a boardroom. We do not have 48 hours. The lender needs the executed guarantee by Friday or the financing falls through. If you do not sign this today, the bank will send the foreclosure notice next week. Do you want to be responsible for putting your mother on the street?" She was leveraging the ultimate guilt trip, attempting to make me the architect of her impending ruin. I knew the foreclosure threat was a synthetic emergency, a manufactured deadline designed to force a hasty decision. If the residential mortgage is truly in default, you can show me the bank notices, I said. Until then, I am taking 48 hours to review this commercial contract. Victoria stood up abruptly. The legs of her bar stool scraped harshly against the hardwood floor. She glared down at me, her face flushed with a dark, resentful anger. She snatched the legal packet off the counter and gripped it tightly against her chest. "Your father always said you were too clinical for your own good," she hissed. "You have no loyalty. You only care about your ledgers." She turned on her heel and marched out of the kitchen, her footsteps echoing down the long hallway toward her bedroom. I listened to the sharp, definitive click of her door shutting. I sat alone in the quiet kitchen. The morning sun continued to pour through the arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I let out a slow, measured breath, releasing the physical tension I had been holding in my shoulders. I had survived the initial ambush. I had held the boundary. I reached for my coffee mug, intending to take a final sip to clear the metallic taste of adrenaline from my mouth. Before my fingers brushed the ceramic, my phone vibrated against the granite countertop. The short, sharp buzz broke the silence of the room. The screen illuminated, displaying a push notification from the credit monitoring application I had installed on my phone months ago. I picked up the device. The alert was marked with a yellow warning icon. It read, "New inquiry alert. A hard inquiry has been posted to your Equifax credit file by Nevada Pacific Financial." My heart skipped a singular heavy beat. A hard inquiry is only generated when a lender pulls a full credit report to authorize a new line of credit or a loan. I had not applied for a loan. I had just refused to sign the guarantee. I stared at the glowing screen as the reality of the notifications settled over me. Victoria had not just drafted a contract and hoped I would sign it. The application had already been submitted. Someone somewhere in this house was actively inputting my social security number into a lending portal, attempting to forge my consent in real time. The confrontation in the kitchen had just been theater. The financial assault was already in motion, shifting rapidly from emotional manipulation to active documented fraud. I locked the screen on my phone, the clinical detachment hardening into a cold, unbreakable resolve. The trap had been sprung, but they had no idea who they had just locked inside it with them. I left the kitchen without saying goodbye to the empty hallway. The desert morning had already baked the interior of my used sedan, the steering wheel hot against my palms. I drove straight to my dormitory near the university campus, navigating the Las Vegas traffic with mechanical focus. I did not call Victoria to demand an explanation. Asking a thief why they are stealing only provides them the opportunity to hide the loot. My roommate was out attending a seminar, leaving the small cinder-block room entirely to me. I dropped my canvas bag on the floor, opened my laptop, and navigated directly to the primary credit bureau portals. The process required the cold precision of a surgeon severing a compromised artery. I logged into Experian first. My keystrokes echoed in the quiet room, a steady rhythm of defense. Security questions two-factor authentication codes, the satisfying invisible click of digital locks engaging. I bypassed the standard fraud alert and placed a hard security freeze on my file. An alert is merely a polite request for a lender to verify identity. A freeze is a concrete wall. I repeated the exact procedure for Equifax and TransUnion, documenting confirmation numbers in a secured, encrypted file. In less than 14 minutes, I severed their access to my financial identity. Whatever application Victoria was currently trying to push through the lending portal would hit that concrete wall and shatter into an automatic decline. I closed the laptop, gathered my notes, and walked across the sun-baked campus to my macroeconomics lecture. The professor stood at the podium discussing the concept of moral hazard, the economic theory that people take greater risks when they are insulated from the consequences of their actions. The lesson felt like a private joke delivered through a microphone. My mother and brother were the living definition of moral hazard. They gambled wildly with their ventures because they assumed my inheritance would serve as their perpetual safety net, absorbing every loss they incurred. I took meticulous notes, maintaining my academic routine. Routine is how you survive chaos. When the lecture ended, I pushed through the heavy glass doors into the blinding afternoon light. The courtyard bustled with students rushing toward the student union, but my eyes caught on a figure leaning against a concrete pillar near the quad. Declan. He never came to campus. He considered academia a tedious waste of time meant only for people who lacked the vision to disrupt industries. Seeing him waiting in the Nevada heat meant Victoria's loan application had bounced. The freeze had worked, and she had dispatched her favorite son to handle the breach. Declan pushed off this pillar and walked toward me. He carried himself with the effortless, practiced grace of a man who believed the world owed him endless favors. He wore a crisp, tailored linen shirt, unbuttoned just enough to project casual success. But my focus immediately dropped to the finer details cataloging his appearance with an auditor's eye. He and Victoria claimed our family was facing imminent foreclosure, yet the harsh sunlight caught the distinctive sapphire crystal of a luxury chronograph on his left wrist. The timepiece retailed for more than a full semester of my tuition. I glanced downward. His feet were clad in flawless hand-stitched Italian loafers, the leather supple and devoid of a single scuff. You do not wear $1,000 shoes to beg for survival unless you are lying about the peril. Lorelei, he called out. His voice sounded rich, steeped in manufactured relief. He opened his arms wide for a hug. I stepped sideways using a passing group of students as a natural physical barrier, forcing him to drop his hands. He chuckled a smooth sound designed to disarm and shoved his hands into his pockets. Still playing hard to get with the affection, I see, he said. I have a study group in 20 minutes, Declan, I replied, keeping my tone flat and unreadable. What are you doing here? His smile faltered, replaced instantly by a mask of grave elder sibling concern. He stepped closer, invading my personal space in an attempt to force a sense of intimacy. Mom called me. She was in tears, Lori. She said you two had a misunderstanding this morning regarding the business. We understood each other perfectly, I said. She handed me a commercial guarantee for a shell company. I told her I do not sign blind contracts. Declan sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose as if burdened by my youthful ignorance. It is not a shell company. It is a holding vehicle for the logistics patent. You know how corporate structuring works, or at least you should, given what we are paying for your education. I let the jab slide. My academic scholarships paid every cent of my tuition, but correcting him would only invite a useless debate. The point is, Declan continued, his voice dropping an octave to convey urgency. Mom is terrified. The bank is circling the house. We are trying to keep a roof over her head, and you threw a tantrum and locked your credit file. Do you have any idea how bad a frozen file makes us look to the underwriters? It makes you look like unauthorized applicants, I said. He leaned in closer. His cologne smelled thick and peppery, overwhelming the dry desert air. The charm vanished from his face, replaced by the heavy, suffocating pressure of familial obligation. This was his preferred tactic, emotional extortion masked as loyalty. Listen to me, he murmured, his eyes locking onto mine. When Dad died, you were just a kid. I was the one who stepped up. I held this family together. I handled the arrangements with the mortuary. I dealt with the lawyers. I made sure you were shielded from the worst of the fallout. I took care of you, Lori. You owe me for that. I stared at the Swiss movement ticking on his wrist. He had not stepped up. He had used the grieving period to corner my father's business contacts, pitching them terrible investment schemes while the soil on the grave was still fresh. But gaslighting relies on rewriting history until the victim doubts their own memory. He needed me to feel indebted, to believe my financial security was a debt I had to repay. We are running out of time, Declan said. His tone shifted from a plea to a soft, smiling threat. Mom is hosting a special birthday dinner for you this Friday. A celebration at that nice steakhouse downtown. I need you to go home, log into those bureaus, lift that security freeze, and bring a pen to the restaurant. If you do not execute that guarantee by Friday evening, the bank forecloses on Monday morning. Mom will be living on the street, and she will know exactly which of her children put her there. He reached out and patted my shoulder, a patronizing double tap meant to seal the command. "Do the right thing, Lori," he said. "See you Friday." I did not argue. I did not defend myself or try to explain the predatory nature of the cross-collateralization clause. I gave him a thin, polite smile, the kind you offer a stranger who has given you incorrect directions on the street. I nodded once, stepped around him, and continued walking toward the library. I did not look back, but I felt his gaze tracking me across the courtyard. He felt confident he had won. He assumed the weight of our mother's hypothetical homelessness would crush my resolve before the week ended. The moment I rounded the corner of the student union shielded by the brick facade, I pulled my phone from my canvas bag. The screen displayed the frozen credit alerts confirming the firewall remained intact. I opened a new message, typing a quick encrypted text to Mr. Adler's private number. "The principal has attempted an unauthorized credit pull. The brother has made contact and issued a Friday deadline. Prepare the contingency." The reply arrived before I reached the library steps. It contained only 2 words: "Standing by." The countdown had officially begun. Friday's celebratory birthday dinner was no longer just a meal. It was a deadline, a ticking clock echoing in the quiet spaces of my mind. They believed they were setting a trap for a naive teenager. They did not realize they were walking onto a stage I had already rigged. I claimed a secluded carol in the deepest corner of the university library, far from the foot traffic and the whispers of study groups. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed a low, sterile note. I opened my laptop and connected to a secured virtual private network. Emotional extortion operates in the shadows of guilt and obligation, but financial fraud requires a paper trail. I was done reacting to my family. It was time to hunt them through the archives. Nevada is famous worldwide for its corporate privacy laws. People flock to Las Vegas and Reno to form anonymous entities hiding their wealth behind nominee managers and registered agents. But privacy is only as strong as the architect who builds it. Declan was arrogant, and arrogance breeds sloppy bookkeeping. I bypassed the standard search engines and logged directly into Silverflume, the state business portal. I typed Sterling Innovations into the entity search bar. The results populated instantly. The limited liability company was formed 8 months ago, listing Declan as the managing member and our home address as the primary place of business. I clicked on the registered agent history and began pulling the thread. The trail did not end with a single tech startup. Declan had registered 4 separate corporate entities within a 12-month period. He created a sprawling, chaotic web of interlocking holding companies. I cross-referenced the officer names and business addresses, building a digital map of his operations. The strategy became painfully clear. He was executing a desperate shell game. He would secure a small line of credit under one entity, then immediately transfer the cash to a second entity under the guise of a consulting fee. He used the inflated bank statements of the second company to secure a larger loan, using those funds to pay the minimum balance on the first. It was a synthetic economy, a carousel of debt designed to manufacture the illusion of solvency for potential investors. But carousels eventually stop spinning. I dug deeper, shifting my focus from corporate registrations to the county recorder database. Lenders protect their investments by filing public liens against a borrower's assets. I searched for uniform commercial code financing statements linked to any of Declan's companies. A document filed exactly 60 days prior caught my attention. It was a statement of anticipated assets, a specialized form used to assure creditors that a sudden influx of capital is pending. I downloaded the digital file. The screen rendered a scanned copy of a multi-page legal contract. My pulse slowed to a deliberate, methodical thud as I read the collateral description. There, printed in stark black and white, was a detailed summary of my trust fund. The document listed the precise principal amount of $2.4 million. It explicitly named me as a guarantor and promised the entirety of my inheritance as unencumbered collateral to back a severe commercial loan. I scrolled down to the final page, my eyes locking onto the signature block. Someone had signed my name. I leaned closer to the monitor, dissecting the ink strokes. It was a decent imitation, the kind that might pass a cursory glance by an overworked loan officer. but I knew the unique cadence of my own handwriting. The loop on the capital letter of my first name was too rounded, lacking my usual sharp angle. The spacing between the letters felt forced, hesitant, lacking the fluid momentum of muscle memory. Victoria and Declan had sat across from me at the dinner table 2 months ago, asking about my midterms, sharing a bottle of wine, all while knowing they had just committed a felony. This was no longer a case of a mother demanding a favor. This was active, documented criminal fraud. They had attempted to pledge my future to a creditor before I even had the legal right to access it myself. I created a new encrypted directory on my hard drive and named it the Friday Audit. I began compiling a meticulous dossier of evidence. I saved the corporate registration histories, the interlocking officer lists, and the time-stamped Uniform Commercial Code filings. I opened a separate window and retrieved a scanned copy of my official state identification card. I placed my genuine signature side by side with the forgery on the loan document. The discrepancy was undeniable. I took a high-resolution screenshot of the comparisons, saving it as a primary exhibit. But a lingering question remained. A traditional bank would never accept a statement of anticipated assets for a minor without demanding direct contact and identity verification. Traditional banks employ strict underwriting protocols. I returned to the financing statement and searched for the secured party. The lender was not a national bank or a recognizable credit union. The creditor was listed as Obsidian Capital Partners, operating out of a suite in a commercial park in Reno. I ran a background query on the firm. Obsidian Capital was not a venture capital group interested in logistics technology. They were a hard money lender. They specialized in predatory short-term bridge loans for desperate borrowers who had been blacklisted by conventional financial institutions. I searched state court dockets for the firm's name. The results painted a grim picture. Dozens of civil litigation cases, property seizures, and ruthless debt collection lawsuits. These were severe operators. They lent capital at exorbitant interest rates, fully expecting the borrower to default so they could seize the underlying collateral. They did not send polite reminder notices in the mail. They sent individuals to collect what was owed, employing tactics that hovered on the dark edge of legality. The chilling reality of my family's situation settled over me like a heavy winter coat. Declan had not just ruined his own credit score. He had invited apex predators into our lives. The deadline Declan had issued in the courtyard earlier that day suddenly made terrifying sense. Friday was not an arbitrary date selected for a birthday dinner. It was a hard deadline imposed by Obsidian Capital. They were demanding the executed formalized guarantee to secure their position, or they were going to call the debt due immediately. If that loan defaulted, the lenders would not care about family harmony. They would go after Victoria. They would strip her of everything she owned, pursuing the equity in our childhood home, her vehicles, and any remaining assets. The stakes had seamlessly transitioned from a ruined financial reputation to genuine legal and physical peril. My mother and brother were standing on the tracks, and a freight train was bearing down on them. They were trying to tie me to the rails so they could jump clear. I closed the public records portal and disconnected from the virtual private network. I sat back in the rigid wooden chair, staring at the blank screen of my laptop. I felt a strange, isolating calm. The anxiety of the unknown had vanished, replaced by the clarifying light of raw data. I knew exactly what they had done. I knew exactly who they owed. I knew exactly why they were desperate to get a pen into my hand by the end of the week. My phone vibrated on the desk, shattering the quiet of the study carrel. I picked up the device. A new message had arrived from Victoria. The text was bright and cheerful, laced with a toxic dose of maternal warmth. She told me she had booked a private dining room at a premium steakhouse downtown for Friday evening. She insisted it would just be the three of us, a quiet, intimate celebration to welcome me into adulthood. She told me to wear something elegant. I stared at the invitation, recognizing the shape of the trap they had spent months building. They thought I was walking blindly into a slaughter. They had no idea I held the blueprints to their destruction in the encrypted drive resting under my palms. I typed a single word in reply and pressed send. Confirmed. I packed my laptop into my canvas bag, the weight of the evidence grounding me. The celebratory dinner was set. I just needed to make sure I brought the right documents to the table. My phone vibrated against the desk, buzzing a second time before I picked it up. Victoria was calling to solidify the trap she had laid via text. I answered on the third ring. Her voice poured through the speaker, dripping with artificial brightness. "Lorelei, sweetheart, I am so glad I caught you," she said. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the blank cinder-block wall of my dorm room. "I received your text, Mom. A dinner downtown." Victoria exhaled a breath that sounded like rehearsed relief. "Yes, a real celebration. Just the three of us. You, me, and Declan. We are going to that exquisite steakhouse inside the Aria, the one your father used to love. I secured a private dining room so we can have a quiet evening to welcome you into adulthood." She weaponized my father's memory effortlessly. A private room meant isolation. It meant a controlled environment where they could dictate the volume, manipulate the narrative, and eliminate the unpredictable variable of an audience. "That sounds fine," I replied, keeping my cadence flat and measured. "I will meet you there." Victoria paused, the rhythm of her pitch disrupted. "Oh, do not be silly. Declan can swing by the campus and pick you up. We can all ride together." She wanted me in their vehicle. She wanted to command the timeline, trapping me in a passenger seat where escape required causing a public scene. If I rode with Declan, I would be entirely dependent on him for transportation, forcing me to remain at the table until they extracted what they wanted. "I have a late study session." I lied, my tone allowing zero room for negotiation. "I will drive my own car. I will be at the restaurant at 7 sharp." A brief, strained silence followed. I could hear the faint clink of ice against crystal on her end of the line. "Suit yourself, darling," she finally said, the warmth thinning into polite annoyance. 7 o'clock. Do not be late." The line went dead. I set the phone face down on the desk. To survive the upcoming evening, I needed to employ a strict financial protocol. In asset management, a firm relies on buffers. A buffer is a reserve of excess capital held specifically to absorb unexpected economic shocks. It prevents a sudden market downturn from bankrupting the institution. Emotionally, I required a buffer of my own. I could not walk into that steakhouse viewing Victoria as a mother or Declan as a brother. Sentimental attachments create fatal vulnerabilities. I had to compartmentalize them, categorizing them as hostile corporate raiders attempting a leveraged buyout. In a leveraged buyout, a predator acquires a target company using a vast amount of borrowed money, and they use the target company's own assets as collateral for the loan. Victoria and Declan were executing the exact same maneuver. They intended to acquire my future by pledging my trust fund to secure their toxic debt, leaving me to bear the entire burden of the collapse. Framing them as ruthless executives neutralized the sting of their betrayal. It transformed a familial tragedy into a sterile business transaction. I drew a deep breath, visualizing a concrete wall rising between my heart and my mind. The buffer was securely in place. 10 minutes later, the screen of my phone illuminated. Victoria had sent a multimedia message. I unlocked the device, expecting a link to the restaurant menu or a dress code reminder. Instead, a photograph filled the display. It was a digital scan of an old Polaroid taken at Red Rock Canyon when I was 8 years old. The desert sun bathed the scene in a soft golden hour glow. I was sitting high on my father's shoulders, grinning a wide, gap-toothed smile. Victoria stood beside us, resting her head against my father's arm, looking young and genuinely happy. Below the image, she had typed a short caption, "Thinking of him today. He would be so incredibly proud of the woman you have become. I cannot wait to celebrate us tonight." The psychological strike hit exactly where she intended. A profound, aching grief flared in my chest. The carefully constructed buffer wavered. For a fleeting second, I remembered the smell of my father's cologne, the rough texture of his jacket, and the unconditional safety of his grip around my ankles. I missed him with a physical intensity that made my throat tighten. The little girl in the photograph just wanted her family back. Victoria knew this. She understood that nostalgia was a potent anesthetic designed to numb my critical thinking before she slid a contract across a linen tablecloth. I stared at her smiling face in the picture. Then my mind superimposed the forged signature from the obsidian capital document over the image. The narrow, cramped lettering overlaid the golden desert sunlight. The vulnerability vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, clarifying anger. She was using a beautiful memory of my dead father to soften me up for a financial slaughter. I locked the screen. I did not send a reply. The time for passive observation had ended. I opened my email client and drafted a secure message to Mr. Adler. I typed out the name of the steakhouse, the address on the Las Vegas Strip, and the exact time of the reservation. I requested that he keep his phone nearby and remain on standby throughout the evening. I hit send, knowing the corporate trustee of my wealth was now anchored to my timeline. Next, I opened the encrypted directory on my hard drive. I selected the corporate registry trails, the uniform commercial code filings, and the side-by-side signature comparisons. I routed the files to the university library's secure printing station. I grabbed my canvas bag and walked across the sunlit courtyard to the media center. The rhythmic mechanical hum of the laser printer felt like a countdown. I collected the warm pages from the output tray. The ink smelled sharp and industrial. I carried them back to my dorm room and laid them out on my bed, organizing the evidence with meticulous care. I assembled 3 pristine identical packets. The first page of each stack highlighted the predatory cross-collateralization clause. The second page showcased the forged signature. The subsequent pages mapped the synthetic web of Declan's shell companies. Each packet told a clear, irrefutable story of fraud, forgery, and predatory debt. I placed each stack into a crisp manila folder, one for Victoria, one for Declan, and one extra reserved for whoever else they might bring to the ambush. I slipped the 3 folders into a structured leather tote bag. The physical weight of the paper felt reassuring, a tangible anchor to reality against the gaslighting I knew awaited me. I walked to the narrow mirror hanging on the back of my door and assessed my reflection. I bypassed the elegant dresses Victoria would expect me to wear for a birthday celebration. Instead, I chose a tailored navy blazer, a crisp white blouse, and dark trousers. It was the uniform of an auditor, the armor of someone stepping into a boardroom to dismantle a failing enterprise. I checked my wristwatch. The dial indicated it was time to navigate the evening traffic toward the neon corridor of the Strip. I picked up my car keys, the metal cool against my palm. The trap was set on both sides of the table, but only one of us knew the actual stakes of the game. The neon glow of the Las Vegas Strip reflected off the hood of my sedan as I navigated the heavy evening traffic. The transition from the stark desert daylight to the artificial twilight of the city always felt like stepping onto a sprawling theater stage. Every building was designed to extract wealth while offering the illusion of luxury. I pulled into the valet circle at the Aria, handing my keys to an attendant in a crisp uniform. I carried my structured leather tote bag over my shoulder, the weight of the printed evidence pressing reassuringly against my ribs. I walked through the expansive casino floor. The air smelled of pumped oxygen and a faint synthetic citrus blend, a calculated fragrance meant to keep guests alert and spending. Slot machines chimed in a chaotic symphony of manufactured luck, but I tuned out the noise. I was entering a different kind of negotiation, one where the house advantage belonged entirely to me. The hostess stood behind a marble podium at the entrance of the high-end steakhouse. I gave her the reservation name. She offered a polished smile, picked up a leather-bound menu, and guided me away from the bustling main dining room. We walked down a hushed corridor lined with vintage wine bottles displayed behind tempered glass. The noise of the casino faded into a thick, insulated quiet. She stopped in front of a set of heavy mahogany doors, turned the brass handle, and pushed them open. I stepped over the threshold, and the reality of the ambush materialized exactly as I had predicted. The private dining room was an exercise in corporate intimidation. Dark wood paneling absorbed the dim lighting from a modern chandelier. A long rectangular table occupied the center of the space set with heavy silver and crystal water glasses. It was not an intimate family gathering. 4 people waited inside. Victoria sat near the head of the table wearing a tailored emerald dress that projected an image of effortless generational wealth. Declan sat to her right, sporting his designer watch and a confident practiced smirk. The remaining 2 seats were occupied by men I had never met, though I instantly recognized their archetypes from my finance textbooks. The man to Victoria left was sleek and meticulously groomed. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost more than a semester of my college tuition. His hair was styled with expensive product, and a leather briefcase rested on the floor beside his polished wingtip shoes. He exuded the predatory polish of an attorney who specialized in separating desperate people from their remaining assets. The 4th man sat across from the lawyer. He was a stark contrast to the refined environment of the steakhouse. He wore a navy suit that did not quite fit his broad, heavy shoulders. His jaw was square, his posture rigid, and his eyes scanned the room with the cold, assessing glare of an enforcer. He looked entirely out of place among the fine china and crystal. This was the representative from Obsidian Capital, the hard money lender who specialized in toxic debt and severe collection tactics. Victoria stood up the moment the door closed behind me. She spread her arms, her face breaking into a wide, theatrical smile. "Lorelei, sweetheart, happy birthday," she chimed. Her voice echoed slightly in the quiet room. She stepped forward to embrace me, attempting to establish physical dominance early in the negotiation. I did not step into her arms. I shifted my leather tote bag to my opposite shoulder, using the subtle motion to intercept her hug. I offered a brief, formal nod instead. Victoria froze for a fraction of a second, her smile tightening at the edges before she recovered her composure. "I am glad you found the room," she said, smoothing the fabric of her dress. "Come sit down. We have a wonderful evening planned." She gestured toward an empty chair positioned in the middle of the table, trapped directly between Declan and the severe private lender. It was a tactical seating arrangement designed to box me in and subject me to overlapping fields of pressure. I ignored her gesture. I walked past the designated chair and pulled out the seat at the absolute foot of the table, establishing a polar opposite power center. I placed my tote bag on the floor next to my ankle and sat down, folding my hands neatly on top of the linen tablecloth. Declan let out a short, dismissive scoff. "Always have to be difficult, Lori," he muttered, reaching for his water glass. Victoria returned to her seat at the head of the table, clearing her throat to regain control of the narrative. "Well, let us get the celebration started. We are not holding back tonight." A waiter entered the room through a discreet side door. Victoria did not ask to see the wine list. She ordered a bottle of vintage champagne by name, a selection that retailed for nearly $2,000. I kept my expression blank, auditing the transaction in my head. I knew the credit card she intended to use would likely decline, or she would force Declan to put it on one of his overextended corporate accounts. It was a classic display of moral hazard, spending lavishly to project a solvency that did not exist. The waiter turned to me. "And for you, Miss Bar sparkling water," I said. "No ice." The waiter bowed and exited, sealing the 5 of us inside the heavy mahogany walls. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. "Lorelei," Victoria began, folding her hands atop the table. "I want to introduce you to some very important people. This is Mr. Gower. He is a senior partner at a prominent corporate law firm here in the city. He has been offering our family some brilliant strategic advice." Mr. Gower flashed a bright synthetic smile. He did not extend his hand, signaling that he viewed me as a subordinate variable in his equation. "A pleasure to meet you, Lorelei. Your mother has told me wonderful things about your academic achievements. And this," Victoria continued, gesturing to the heavy-set man across from Gower, "is Mr. Vargas. He is a private equity partner who sees the immense potential in your brother's new logistics venture." Mr. Vargas did not smile. He gave a single curt nod. He picked up his crystal water glass and began tapping his index finger against the rim. The rhythmic, dull thud of his finger felt like a ticking metronome setting a frantic pace for the impending transaction. He was not here for a social dinner. He was here to secure his collateral, and his patience was visibly thin. Victoria attempted to bridge the tension with casual conversation. She adopted the tone of a proud parent boasting at a country club luncheon. "Lorelei is a phenomenal student," she announced to the two strangers. "She maintains a perfect grade point average in her finance program. We are all so incredibly proud of her dedication." She looked at me, waiting for me to accept the compliment and participate in the charade. I looked back at her. "Thank you." My voice was flat, devoid of any conversational hook. I offered no elaboration, no reciprocal question, and no smile. Declan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table in an attempt to manufacture a relaxed atmosphere. "So, Lori, how is that macroeconomics class treating you? Still burying your head in the textbooks while the rest of the world makes real money?" "It is educational," I replied. The brevity of my response hung in the air, a dead weight that Declan could not easily lift. He shifted in his chair, glancing at Mr. Vargas, clearly eager to prove he could manage his younger sister in front of his creditor. "Educational," Declan echoed, forcing a chuckle. "Right. Well, textbook theory is nice, but practical application is where the real wealth is generated. You will learn that eventually." "Yes," I said. I offered nothing else. The silence returned heavier than before. In any negotiation, the party who speaks the least holds the most leverage. People are naturally conditioned to fill silence out of social discomfort. When you refuse to participate in the expected rhythm of small talk, you force the other party to work twice as hard to maintain the facade. Victoria tried again, her voice straining slightly under the pressure. "Have you thought about what you want to do for your birthday weekend? Maybe we could go shopping tomorrow? My treat." "No," I answered. The single syllable echoed against the mahogany panels. Mr. Gower adjusted his cuffs, a subtle tell that indicated his discomfort with the stalling tactic. He had likely billed Victoria a premium hourly rate for this evening, and he wanted to execute the paperwork and leave. Mr. Vargas stopped tapping his glass. He rested his heavy forearms on the table and stared directly at Victoria. The look in his eyes was unambiguous. It conveyed a clear, menacing directive to stop wasting his time with domestic theater and produce the signature he had been promised. Victoria swallowed hard. The polished veneer of the wealthy matriarch was beginning to crack under the scrutiny of her lenders. She realized the small talk was failing. She could not charm me into a compliant mood, and she could not delay the transaction any longer without provoking the wrath of the man sitting across from her lawyer. The waiter returned, interrupting the standoff. He presented the champagne bottle, popped the cork with a muted sigh, and poured the golden liquid into 4 fluted glasses. He set my sparkling water in front of me and quickly retreated from the room, sensing the toxic atmosphere. Victoria picked up her champagne flute. Her hand trembled slightly, causing the liquid to shiver against the glass. "Well," she said, her voice tight and hurried, "let us propose a toast. To Lorelei and to the future of the Sterling family." Declan and Mr. Gower raised their glasses. Mr. Vargas did not touch his drink. He kept his eyes locked on Victoria. I did not lift my water glass. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting on the table, waiting for the inevitable moment when the velvet gloves came off and the commercial guarantee appeared. The pleasantries had officially expired, and the true cost of this dinner was about to be presented on a silver platter. The waiter returned to clear the appetizer plates, gathering the porcelain with practiced efficiency. No one had eaten much aside from Declan, who had consumed his seared scallops with a forced performative appetite. The clinking of silver against china provided a brief, chaotic soundtrack to the underlying tension. When the waiter finally retreated through the discreet side door, the heavy latch clicked shut. The sound sealed the 5 of us inside a silent vacuum. The birthday charade ended the moment the door closed. Victoria dropped her maternal facade. The strained, bright smile she had been wearing all evening vanished, leaving behind a cold, calculated pragmatism. She did not look at me. She turned her head and gave a sharp, definitive nod to the attorney sitting to her left. Mr. Gower understood the cue. He reached down to the leather briefcase resting by his polished wingtip shoes. The twin brass clasps snapped open a sharp metallic sound that cut through the quiet room. He extracted a thick, heavily bound stack of legal documents. The paper was premium stock, the kind designed to add physical gravity to a transaction. Gower placed the packet flat on the linen tablecloth and pushed it forward. The heavy document slid smoothly across the fabric, gliding past the crystal water glasses and the untouched champagne flutes, until it hit the edge of my service plate with a soft thud. Victoria folded her hands together, resting them on the edge of the table. She leaned forward, resuming her pitch, but her tone had shifted. It was no longer the voice of a mother requesting a favor. It was the voice of a corporate executive attempting to close a hostile acquisition. "This is a family partnership agreement," Victoria announced. She gestured toward the stack of paper with a manicured hand. "We had Mr. Gower draft this to formalize our shared interests. It outlines the structure of Sterling Innovations and guarantees your position within the company. Your signature tonight will finally unite our resources. It brings you into the fold, Lorelei. It makes you an equal partner in building the legacy your father left behind." She spoke the words with practiced rhythm, relying on the emotional weight of my father's memory to blind me to the reality of the paperwork. She expected me to feel honored to view the thick contract as an initiation into adulthood, rather than a financial execution. I looked down at the document. The title page bore the emblem of Mr. Gower's law firm, followed by a dense block of introductory text. I did not reach for it. Declan interpreted my stillness as hesitation. He seized the opportunity to assert dominance, eager to prove his utility to the private lender watching from across the table. He shifted in his chair, leaning heavily into my personal space. His shoulder brushed against mine, a deliberate invasion meant to physically intimidate me. He reached inside his tailored linen jacket, retrieved a heavy gold fountain pen, and dropped it directly on top of the legal packet. "Just sign the damn thing so we can enjoy dinner," Declan said. His voice was harsh, stripped of the charming older brother persona he had deployed in the campus courtyard earlier that afternoon. "We have been dealing with this headache all week. Do not drag this out and ruin the evening for everyone. Pick up the pen, Laurie." He tapped his index finger against the table, a rapid, impatient rhythm mirroring the nervous energy he carried. He loomed over me, attempting to use his height and proximity to force compliance. He wanted me to feel small, rushed, and overwhelmed by the presence of the two older men watching from the opposite side of the mahogany table. I ignored the gold pen. I ignored Declan's proximity. I reached out with both hands and pulled the thick stack of documents squarely in front of me. I opened the cover page and bypassed the preamble entirely. My father had spent countless hours at our kitchen island teaching me the anatomy of a contract. He taught me that the initial pages are filled with boilerplate language designed to fatigue the reader, lulling them into a false sense of security before the true traps are revealed in the subsequent covenants. I scanned the definition section, identifying the designated terms for the borrower, the guarantor, and the collateral. Then I began flipping the pages, speed-reading the dense paragraphs with a trained surgical focus. I discarded the filler and hunted for the operative clauses, the specific mechanisms that dictated the flow of capital and the transfer of liability. The room grew exceedingly quiet. The only sound was the crisp rustle of heavy paper as I turned page after page. Mr. Gower shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had drafted a document intended to intimidate a teenager, anticipating that the sheer volume of legal jargon would prevent any serious scrutiny. He did not expect me to audit his work in real time. I found the trap on page 12. It was buried beneath a misleading subheader labeled Fiduciary Restructuring, formatted in a dense block of text devoid of paragraph breaks to discourage careful reading. I traced my finger along the printed lines, dissecting the legal mechanics of the theft they had orchestrated. The clause was not a partnership agreement. It was an irrevocable assignment of beneficial interest. The text explicitly directed the immediate transfer of my entire $2.4 million trust fund into the operational accounts of Sterling Innovations. Furthermore, it contained a sweeping waiver of rights, entirely stripping me of my status as a beneficiary. If I signed the bottom of the final page, I would be legally relinquishing every claim to my inheritance. But the theft did not end there. The subsequent paragraph established the governance structure of the newly funded entity. It named Victoria Sterling as the sole managing director, granting her unilateral authority to disperse the capital's secure new debt and liquidate assets without requiring any secondary approval or oversight from me. They were not asking me to guarantee a loan. They were asking me to sign a deed of surrender. They intended to absorb my wealth, lock me out of the holding company, and grant Victoria absolute control over the treasury. I finished reading the clause. I slowly closed the heavy legal packet and aligned the edges until they were perfectly flush with the table. I picked up the gold pen Declan had dropped, held it for a brief moment, and then deliberately placed it out of reach near the centerpieces. I looked up and met my mother's eyes. Her gaze was locked onto mine, searching my face for compliance, waiting for the relief of a secured signature. "This isn't a consolidation," I stated calmly, keeping my voice level and entirely devoid of emotional inflection. I shifted my gaze to the severe private lender sitting across from Mr. Gower. I looked directly at him as I delivered the final assessment. "This is a liquidation." The reaction was immediate. Mr. Vargas, the representative from Obsidian Capital, froze. The rhythmic tapping of his finger against his water glass ceased instantly. His head snapped toward Victoria, his eyes widening in sudden sharp alarm. Hard money lenders operate on a strict foundation of secured, verified collateral. They accept high-risk borrowers only when the underlying assets are guaranteed and ready to be leveraged. Mr. Vargas had clearly been fed a very different, much safer narrative prior to this dinner. Victoria and Declan had likely assured him that I was a willing participant, a compliant daughter eager to co-sign the debt and pledge a liquid trust fund to back their venture. Hearing the designated guarantor refer to the contract as a liquidation shattered that illusion. A hostile, uncooperative asset changes the risk calculation entirely. An unsigned agreement means the collateral does not exist, which means the seven-figure loan he was poised to authorize was backed by absolutely nothing. The color drained from Victoria's face as she watched the lender's reaction. The house of cards she had spent months building, propped up by forged documents and desperate promises, began to visibly tremble. The polished veneer of the steakhouse ambush cracked, exposing the frantic hollow core of their scheme to the one man in the room who held the power to destroy them. The silence inside the mahogany-paneled room thickened. The word liquidation seemed to echo off the dark walls, dismantling the careful illusion Victoria had spent months constructing. Mr. Vargas shifted his broad shoulders, his gaze cutting away from me and locking onto my mother. The rhythmic tapping of his finger remained halted. In the high-risk lending sector, ambiguity is a threat, but a recalcitrant guarantor is a crisis. Victoria recognized the shift. The polished, affectionate mother routine disintegrated. Her emerald dress suddenly seemed too rigid, her posture strained. She leaned across the table, closing the physical distance, abandoning any pretense of celebration. Her eyes hardened into dark, desperate points of focus. "You have no idea what you are talking about, Lorelei," she hissed, her voice dropping into a harsh, frantic register meant only for my ears. "This is how business operates. You pledge current assets to secure future growth. We are handing you a seat at the table." "You are handing me the liability," I replied. "There is a distinct difference." Declan shifted in his chair, his jaw muscles flexing. "Lori, stop acting like you know better than the professionals in this room. Mr. Gower drafted this. It is standard operating procedure." "It is a hostile takeover of my trust," I corrected him. Victoria slammed her palm against the edge of the table. The crystal water glasses rattled. "Family takes care of family." She snapped, her voice rising loud enough to make Mr. Gower flinch. "Your father built our name, and you are sitting there counting pennies while we are trying to save our home. If you refuse to sign this agreement tonight, the bank will foreclose. We will lose everything, and it will be your fault. You will carry that failure for the rest of your life." She hurled the guilt at me, expecting the weight of her impending ruin to crush my resistance. She wanted me to internalize her poor financial management as my own personal failing. I watched the tendons tighten in her neck. I noted the faint tremor in her hands. She was terrified. I reached down to the floor, my fingers finding the smooth handle of my leather tote bag. I did not engage with her emotional extortion. I did not defend my loyalty to my father's memory. Arguments about loyalty are subjective, endless loops designed to exhaust the victim. Evidence, however, is finite and undeniable. I unzipped the tote and pulled out the plain manila folder. It looked remarkably unremarkable compared to the thick premium stock of Mr. Gower's legal packet. It was simple, unassuming, and devastating. I opened the folder and extracted the first piece of paper. It was the printed copy of the Statement of Anticipated Assets, the exact document Declan had filed with the county recorder 60 days prior. I did not look at my mother. I did not look at my brother. I turned my attention directly to the man who held their actual debt. I slid the printed sheet across the white linen tablecloth. It moved smoothly, stopping precisely in front of Mr. Vargas. The private lender frowned, his thick brows knitting together as he looked down at the document. He recognized the standard form. He had likely reviewed hundreds of them in his career. I did not sign this, I stated calmly. Mr. Vargas raised his head, his eyes narrowing. Mr. Gower leaned over, attempting to read the page upside down, his sleek demeanor faltering. Victoria stopped breathing. The sudden cessation of her frantic energy signaled a profound localized panic. My credit files have been strictly frozen across all bureaus since this morning. I continued, speaking with the measured, even cadence of an auditor presenting a discrepancy. I have never authorized any pledge of my trust fund to cover my brother's debt. I have never entered into any agreement with Sterling Innovations. That document was filed with the county without my knowledge, and more importantly, without my consent. Mr. Vargas picked up the paper. His large hands held the edges carefully. "This is your signature on the guarantor line," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He was testing the waters, trying to ascertain if I was simply suffering from buyer's remorse, or if the foundation of his collateral was genuinely flawed. "It is a forgery," I replied. I reached into the folder and produced the second sheet of paper. It featured the side-by-side comparison I had generated in the university library. On the left was my authenticated signature from my state identification card. On the right was the magnified signature from the collateral statement. I slid this second sheet across the table, aligning it next to the first. "Look at the mechanics of the ink," I instructed, guiding his eyes to the discrepancies. "The capital L on my true signature features a sharp defined angle at the baseline. The signature on your collateral document uses a soft, rounded loop. Notice the spacing between the vowels. My handwriting carries fluid momentum. The forged version is cramped, hesitant, drawn by someone attempting to mimic a shape rather than write a name." Mr. Vargas stared at the comparison. He did not need a forensic handwriting expert to see the truth. The visual evidence was glaring. The signature securing his 7-figure loan was a clumsy, desperate imitation. "You have been operating under the assumption that you hold a secured position," I said to him, keeping my tone objective and informative. "You do not. Sterling Innovations has no legal claim to my $2.4 million. The collateral backing your loan does not exist." The atmosphere in the room shifted with terrifying speed. Mr. Vargas turned a deep mottled shade of red. The color crept up from his collar, flooding his neck and jaw. He was a hard money lender, a man who thrived on leverage and enforceable contracts. Finding out a borrower lacked funds was a standard business risk. Finding out a borrower had submitted fraudulent public filings to secure a loan was a direct insulting theft. He realized in real time that he was not sitting across from savvy entrepreneurs experiencing a cash flow delay. He was dealing with active, cornered fraudsters. Victoria understood the catastrophic nature of the moment. The truth was out resting flat on the table, dismantling her last line of defense. Panic overrode her cultivated poise. She let out a sharp, erratic gasp. "Give me that," she commanded, her voice cracking. "That is a misunderstanding. It is a preliminary draft. She lunged across the table. Her sudden movement knocked against her crystal water glass. It tipped over, spilling iced water across the linen, soaking into the fabric in a dark, spreading stain. She stretched her arm as far as she could, her manicured fingers clawing toward the printed evidence resting in front of the lender. She wanted to snatch the paper away, to physically remove the proof of her felony from his sight. She never reached it. Mr. Vargas reacted with startling speed for a man of his size. He brought his heavy hand down, slapping his palm flat over the documents. The impact echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. The physical force halted Victoria's hand mere inches from the paper. She froze, suspended awkwardly over the spilled water, her arm outstretched. "Sit down," Mr. Vargas ordered. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The low, guttural command carried an implicit threat of severe consequences. Victoria retracted her arms slowly, her hands trembling. She sank back into her chair, her emerald dress clinging to the spilled water on the table edge. She looked small, stripped of her authority and her illusion of wealth. Declan sat frozen beside her. His bravado entirely extinguished, his eyes darting between the angry lender and the mahogany door. The dynamic in the room had pivoted. 10 minutes ago, they believed I was a vulnerable target trapped in a private room destined to sign away my future to save their comfort. Now the power structure had inverted. I sat quietly at the foot of the table, my hands resting near my plain manila folder, watching the predators realize they had just walked into a cage. Victoria was no longer the matriarch commanding a family dinner. She was a liability trapped under the furious gaze of a creditor who had just discovered his money was gone. I let the silence stretch, allowing the gravity of the forgery to settle over them. The audit was proceeding exactly as planned. Mr. Vargas slowly lifted his heavy hand just enough to slide the forged statement of anticipated assets closer to his chest. He folded the document once deliberately and tucked it into the interior pocket of his navy suit. He did not look at Victoria. He did not look at Declan. He directed his severe, unblinking gaze toward the attorney sitting to my mother's left. Mr. Gower sat rigid in his bespoke charcoal suit. He had orchestrated this evening, anticipating a swift, highly lucrative closing. He had drafted the thick partnership agreement, expecting to secure a vast pool of fresh collateral, earning a premium fee for facilitating the transaction. Now he was sitting adjacent to a documented felony. His professional reputation and his retainer were evaporating in real time. Gower adjusted his silk tie, attempting to manufacture authority from the sudden chaos. He could not defend the forged signature. He could not justify the fraudulent public filing. He recognized that the criminal liability in the room was a contagion, and he needed to pivot immediately to protect his own interests. He bypassed the forgery and targeted me directly, retreating into the one arena where he felt superior. He reached for the weapon of civil litigation. "You are making a profound mistake, Lorelei," Gower said. He leaned forward, adopting a posture of stern legal warning. "You cannot simply walk away from this table. Your presence here tonight implies a willingness to negotiate. Sterling Innovations has incurred substantial operational debts based on the assurance of your financial backing. By backing out now, you are causing quantifiable harm to your family's enterprise." He rested his hands on the thick stack of useless contracts, projecting a veneer of unshakable confidence. "If you refuse to execute this guarantee, we will not sit idly by," he continued, his tone hardening into a direct threat. "I will file a civil suit against you tomorrow morning. I will pursue a claim of equitable reliance. We will argue that your prior conduct led this company to assume severe financial obligations. I will sue your estate, directly bypass the corporate veil, and secure a judicial order to attach your trust fund to satisfy these debts. You will spend the next 5 years drowning in legal fees, and we will extract the capital regardless of whether you sign this paper tonight." He delivered the threat with practiced rhythm, utilizing complex terminology designed to intimidate. He expected an 18-year-old student to crumble at the prospect of a protracted legal battle. He expected me to weigh the cost of defending a lawsuit against the ease of simply signing the document and appeasing the room. I let him finish. Interrupting a man who is digging his own grave only delays the inevitable burial. I watched a faint sheen of perspiration form on his forehead. I listened to his voice echo off the dark mahogany panels, noting the faint tremor of desperation underneath his polished delivery. When he finally stopped speaking, the room fell into a heavy, expectant silence. Victoria watched me, a flicker of desperate hope returning to her eyes. She believed her highly paid attorney had just found the loophole that would force my compliance. I did not argue the merits of his hypothetical lawsuit. I did not point out that equitable reliance requires an actual promise, which I had never given. Arguing case law with a desperate attorney is a waste of energy. I preferred to end the game entirely. I lifted my left wrist and checked the dial of my watch. The silver hands aligned perfectly under the dim chandelier light. It was exactly 8:15 in the evening. I reached into the pocket of my navy blazer and retrieved my phone. I unlocked the screen and opened the encrypted messaging application, navigating to the thread with Mr. Adler. I typed a single word: enter. I pressed send, locked the screen, and placed the phone face down next to my sparkling water. Then I turned my attention back to the sleek attorney. I offered him a quiet, devastating smile. It was the serene expression of an auditor who had reviewed the final ledger and found the opposing party entirely insolvent. "You cannot sue my estate, Mr. Gower," I stated cleanly, my voice cutting through the lingering panic in the dining room. "Because I do not own it anymore." Gower frowned, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. Victoria stiffened her posture, going rigid against the back of her chair. "I am well aware of how hostile litigation works," I explained, adopting the calm instructional cadence of a university professor. "My father taught me that anyone can file a lawsuit for any reason. He also taught me that securing a judgment is useless if you cannot collect the damages. You are threatening to attach my trust fund to satisfy my brother's predatory debt. You are operating under the assumption that I hold legal title to those assets." I folded my hands on the linen tablecloth, resting them near my plain manila folder. At exactly 1 minute to midnight on my 18th birthday, I sat in a law firm overlooking the Strip. I continued. I executed a specialized transfer. I moved the entirety of my inheritance, all $2.4 million, into a Nevada asset protection trust. I did not structure it as a revocable family vehicle. I established a self-settled spendthrift trust utilizing the specific statutory protections offered by this state. The color began to drain from Gower's face. He was a corporate attorney operating in Las Vegas. He understood exactly what those words meant. "The ink dried," I said, locking eyes with him. "The transfer is complete. An independent corporate trustee now holds the exclusive legal title to the principal. The trust is strictly irrevocable. I am no longer the owner of those funds. I am merely a discretionary beneficiary." Victoria let out a short, breathless sound, as if all the oxygen had been vacuumed from her lungs. She looked at Gower, silently pleading with him to refute my claim, but the attorney remained frozen. "Do you understand the mechanics of that structure, Mr. Gower?" I asked, refusing to let him look away. "It means I have zero authority to compel a distribution. I cannot pledge the assets as collateral. I cannot assign my beneficial interest to Sterling Innovations. And most importantly, the spendthrift provision creates a statutory firewall against creditors. Even if you sued me for equitable reliance and won a judgment, you could not collect a single penny. The corporate trustee is legally obligated to deny any request that benefits a creditor." I tapped my index finger lightly against the heavy stack of contracts he had slid across the table. "Your lawsuit is dead on arrival," I stated, dropping the final anvil. "The money is legally untouchable. It is shielded from me, it is shielded from you, and it is strictly shielded from anyone attempting to collect on my brother's fraudulent company." Gower sat in stunned silence. The reality of the impenetrable legal fortress I had built washed over him, dismantling his strategy piece by piece. The thick partnership agreement resting on the table was no longer a binding financial instrument. It was just an expensive stack of useless paper. He had billed Victoria a premium rate to draft a contract that targeted an empty vault. He understood that he had been outmaneuvered by a teenager who understood the local statutes better than he did. He looked down at his polished wingtip shoes, his professional arrogance entirely extinguished. He had no leverage left to apply. Mr. Vargas, the private lender, let out a low, humorless chuckle. It was a dark, gravelly sound that communicated profound danger. He turned his heavy gaze away from Gower and directed it toward Declan. The lender recognized that the intricate legal shield I described meant his only remaining path to recovery lay directly through the people who had forged the documents. Declan stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. The designer watch on his wrist caught the light, a glaring reminder of the synthetic wealth he had purchased with stolen time. He realized that the perpetual safety net he had relied upon his entire life had been unceremoniously cut. The bottomless well of my father's money was sealed behind a steel door, and Declan was left standing on the outside holding the debts he had accrued. The tension in the room coiled tight, preparing to snap as the reality of their unprotected exposure finally took hold. Declan pushed his chair back with a harsh, scraping sound. The heavy mahogany frame tilted, lost its center of gravity, and crashed onto the carpet. The impact sent a dull shudder through the floorboards. He stood towering over the dining table, his face flushed, the veins in his neck pulled tight against his crisp linen collar. The charming facade he wore like a second skin evaporated, leaving behind a raw, desperate predator who had just realized his primary food source was locked behind glass. "You ruined my life!" he shouted. The sound echoed off the dark wood panels, abrasive and unrefined. "I spent months putting this deal together. I put my own name on the line to secure this financing, and you sit there and torpedo the entire structure out of spite." I looked up at him. I did not flinch. "You put my name on the line, Declan. You forged a signature. I took care of you," he yelled, slamming his hand onto the table. The crystal water glasses rattled, the ice clinking against the rims in a frantic rhythm. "When Dad died, who was there, I managed the arrangements. I handled the guests. I shielded you from the reality of running a household. I sacrificed my own 20s to keep this family afloat, and this is how you repay me. By locking away the only capital that can save us." I cataloged his performance. It was a fascinating display of revisionist history, a desperate attempt to rewrite a narrative I had witnessed firsthand. When our father passed away, Declan did not manage the household. He used the funeral reception to network, handing out sleek business cards for a failed real estate venture, while the caterers cleared the plates. He spent the intervening years draining Victoria's accounts, trading genuine security for leased sports cars, designer watches, and VIP tables at casinos. He never shielded me. He merely ignored me until he needed a guarantor with a pristine credit score. I did not raise my voice by a single decibel. I kept my hands folded on the linen cloth, projecting an anchor of calm in the center of his storm. "I do not owe you a rescue, Declan," I said. The words carried the cool, precise edge of a scalpel cutting through his manufactured outrage. "You manufactured your own crisis. You built a synthetic company, borrowed predatory debt, and expected me to serve as your perpetual safety net. I am retiring as the family lifeguard." He stared at me, his chest heaving, his mouth open but lacking a retort. The metaphor struck a nerve. He had spent his adult life thrashing in deep water, demanding that others pull him ashore, only to dive right back into the current the moment he caught his breath. Now he was drowning, and I had just folded my arms on the beach. Across the table, Mr. Vargas stood up. He did not engage in the familial drama. He operated in a world governed by hard arithmetic and enforceable collateral. Finding out the collateral was a phantom meant the conversation was over. He reached for his leather briefcase, placed it flat on the table, and snapped the brass latches open. He gathered his files, stuffing them inside with sharp, efficient movements. "This was a cute trick," Vargas muttered, directing his dark, unforgiving glare at Victoria. "But I do not play games with forged public filings. You brought me into a room to sign a loan backed by a minor's stolen identity." Gower attempted a weak intervention, his professional composure in tatters. "Mr. Vargas, we can restructure. We can find alternative collateral." "Shut up," Vargas said, snapping his briefcase shut. He leaned closer to Victoria, casting a heavy shadow over her chair. You have 48 hours to vacate the commercial lease on that warehouse. If I do not have the keys by Monday morning, I am taking this forged anticipated asset statement directly to the district attorney. Wire fraud is a federal problem. Have a nice birthday dinner. He turned on his heel and walked out of the room. The heavy door clicked shut behind him, sealing the remaining four of us inside the wreckage of the ambush. Victoria sat in stunned, horrified silence. Her lips were parted, her eyes darting from the closed door to the empty space where her savior had just sat. The reality of the district attorney threat hung in the air, a guillotine waiting to drop. She had orchestrated an elaborate stage production dressing up theft in fine dining and vintage champagne, and the audience had just called the police. I turned my focus entirely to her. You thought I would be too sentimental to check the math, I said. Victoria blinked, struggling to process the dismantling of her empire. Lorelei, please. We are your family. Love should not come with a fraudulent invoice attached. I replied, my voice steady, devoid of yelling or tears. The quiet devastation in my tone was far more lethal than Declan's shouting. You sat across from me in the kitchen this morning and played the role of a desperate mother trying to save a childhood home. You knew that home was not in foreclosure. You knew the document you slid across the granite was a trap. You sent me a photograph of Dad this afternoon, using his memory to try and soften my defenses, all while harboring the knowledge that you had already submitted my social security number to a hard money lender. I reached into my plain manila folder and pulled out a single sheet of lined notebook paper. It was not a legal document. It was a handwritten ledger. I kept the receipts, I told her, sliding the notebook paper forward. I tracked the downgraded country club membership. I noted the pawned silver candelabras and the replica foyer credenza. I saw the commercial loan denial letters you threw in the trash months ago. I watched you bleed your own accounts dry to fund Declan's illusions. And when you ran out of cash, you decided to feed me to the furnace. Victoria flinched, shrinking back into her chair. Her emerald dress suddenly looked like a costume from a cancelled play. The sophisticated matriarch had been replaced by a cornered grifter. I have spent the last year carrying the emotional weight of your financial incompetence. I continued, refusing to break eye contact. I walked on eggshells, pretending not to notice the delinquent tax notices arriving in the mail. I analyzed your desperation, hoping you would eventually find the clarity to stop funding his failures. Instead, you escalated. You chose to commit a felony rather than tell your favorite son no. I placed my hands flat on either side of the folder. I refuse to be the collateral damage for your unhinged decisions, I said. You built a house of cards and you invited a predator inside to inspect it. Do not ask me to extinguish a fire you intentionally set. The truth stripped Victoria and Declan of any remaining illusion of control. They had no leverage left to apply. They had no collateral left to pledge. They had no defense against the cold, undeniable facts resting on the table between the crystal glasses. The silence returned dense and suffocating as they grappled with the magnitude of their exposure and the realization that their perpetual safety net was permanently gone. Then the brass handle of the mahogany door clicked. Someone was turning the latch from the outside. The heavy wood swung open, revealing a figure standing in the threshold. The timing was precise, calculated, and entirely expected by only one person in the room. The heavy mahogany doors swung inward. The brass hinges operated in perfect silence, a testament to the high-end construction of the steakhouse, but the visual impact hit the dining room like a physical blow. Mr. Adler stepped over the threshold. He wore a tailored navy pinstripe suit, projecting the understated precision of a man who managed generational wealth for a living. He carried a pristine black leather folder tucked securely under his left arm. He did not look rushed. He did not look angry. He simply radiated the serene, unbothered authority of a legal institution that had survived decades of market fluctuations and human greed. He surveyed the chaotic scene before him, taking in the spilled water, the overturned chair, and the pale, panicked faces of my mother and brother. Victoria stared at him, her eyes wide with sudden recognition. She knew exactly who he was. Mr. Adler had served as the primary executor of my father's estate. He was the man who had formally politely denied her repeated requests for unauthorized cash advances during the long probate period. Declan recognized him as well, shrinking back slightly into his seat. The realization dawned on both of them that their carefully isolated ambush had just been breached by the one person equipped to dismantle it. Mr. Adler walked slowly around the perimeter of the long table. He did not acknowledge the discarded gold pen or the tension radiating from the opposing side of the room. He moved directly to my side, taking a deliberate stance just behind my right shoulder. We shared no genetic history. We were not bound by blood. Yet standing there in the dim, manufactured twilight of that private dining room, he represented the truest definition of family I had known since my father passed away. He was the chosen ally, the guardian who stepped onto the battlefield to protect a young woman when her own relatives attempted to harvest her financial future for spare parts. My father had trusted Mr. Adler to safeguard the logistics company, and tonight he was safeguarding the legacy it produced. "Good evening, Victoria," Mr. Adler said. His voice was a calm, resonant baritone that commanded immediate attention. He nodded briefly toward my brother. "Declan." He turned his gaze toward the attorney sitting to my mother's left. Mr. Gower had lost his sleek, predatory shine. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. "And you must be Mr. Gower." Mr. Adler continued, his tone remaining perfectly level. "I am Martin Adler. I serve as the independent corporate trustee for the Lorelei Sterling Nevada Dynasty Trust." He unclasped his pristine leather folder. The crisp snap of the metal fastener echoed in the quiet room. He extracted a single document printed on thick, watermarked paper. He reached across the linen tablecloth and laid it flat, positioning it directly over the fraudulent partnership agreement Gower had presented earlier in the evening. "This is a formal cease and desist order," Mr. Adler stated, tapping his index finger against the top margin of the page. "It outlines your immediate professional peril." Gower stared at the document. He did not attempt to touch it. His hands remained frozen near his polished briefcase. Drafting a contract to assign assets from an irrevocable trust without first consulting the named trustee is a severe ethical breach, Mr. Adler explained, delivering the assessment with clinical detachment. Attempting to coerce a discretionary beneficiary into signing a fraudulent instrument crosses the line into active malpractice. You facilitated a scheme designed to defraud a minor who only reached the age of majority hours ago. Gower swallowed hard, the muscles in his throat working as he searched for a viable defense. He found none. The paper trail was indisputable, and he was sitting in the same room as the physical evidence of forgery. "If you or any representative of your firm attempts to contact my client again," Mr. Adler warned, his voice devoid of any theatrical inflection, "we will respond with crushing civil litigation. Furthermore, I will submit a direct comprehensive referral to the Nevada State Bar Association, including the forged statements your clients utilized tonight. You will spend the remainder of your career defending your license to practice law. Do you understand these terms?" Gower offered a single stiff nod. He understood his exposure. He had gambled his professional standing on the assumption that an 18-year-old girl would lack the resources to fight back. He had grossly underestimated the defense structure my father had set in motion. Having neutralized the legal threat, Mr. Adler shifted his focus to the true architects of the scheme. He looked at Victoria. My mother sat rigid in her emerald dress, her knuckles white as she gripped the edges of her chair. She was trapped, stripped of her attorney's protection, and exposed before the very man who controlled the vault she so desperately wanted to empty. "This is a private family matter, Martin," Victoria attempted to argue. Her voice trembled, lacking its usual commanding resonance. She tried to summon a veneer of aristocratic indignation, but it fractured under the weight of her desperation. "You have no right to interfere with how we manage our internal affairs." Mr. Adler did not blink. He looked at her with the weary patience of a professional who had witnessed countless desperate people try to justify their theft. "There is no family matter here, Victoria," he replied softly. "This is a failed financial crime." He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the back of my chair. The gesture was protective, a physical barrier between my mother's demands and my secured future. My fiduciary duty is to protect the principle of the trust and the well-being of its beneficiary, Mr. Adler stated. You have demonstrated a profound willingness to jeopardize both. You orchestrated a dinner with the explicit intent to coerce your daughter into assuming liability for a toxic commercial loan. You submitted a forged statement of anticipated assets to a hard money lender utilizing her identity without her consent. Victoria opened her mouth to protest, to spin another lie about miscommunications and temporary cash flow delays. But Mr. Adler raised his hand, silencing her instantly. Listen to me very carefully. He delivered the chilling, exceptionally polite warning. If you attempt to contact my client regarding any request for financial assistance ever again, we will not send another warning letter. We will bypass civil remedies entirely. My office will forward the forged loan applications, the cross-collateralization clauses, and the timeline of your unauthorized credit inquiries directly to the local authorities. Wire fraud and identity theft carry strict mandatory sentencing guidelines. The ultimatum landed with devastating finality. Victoria closed her mouth. The threat of public exposure and criminal prosecution was the only currency she truly respected. She cared deeply about her image in the affluent circles of Las Vegas society. A bankruptcy might be whispered about at the country club, but an indictment would ensure she was permanently exiled. The ambush had been entirely reversed. The predators who had walked into the steakhouse expecting to carve up my inheritance were now cornered by their own greed. They had built an elaborate trap only to watch the heavy iron doors swing shut behind them. Mr. Adler stood tall, adjusting the cuffs of his navy suit. He had delivered the necessary boundaries, securing my perimeter against any future incursions. He did not need to shout. He did not need to resort to the emotional hysterics my mother and brother utilized. The facts spoke for themselves, and the law provided the ultimate leverage. I remained seated at the foot of the table, my hands resting near my plain manila folder. I watched my mother stare at the spilled water soaking into the linen tablecloth. I watched my brother look down at his Italian loafers, his synthetic bravado drained. The room felt lighter, the suffocating pressure of their expectations lifting from my shoulders. The corporate trustee had executed his duty, and the defense held firm. Now, the only thing left was to watch the consequences of their unhinged financial incompetence catch up with them. Mr. Vargas absorbed the finality of the trustee's statement. The heavyset lender understood the mechanics of a Nevada dynasty trust just as well as the attorney sitting across from him. He knew an independent corporate trustee represented an impenetrable wall. The seven-figure capital injection he had authorized for Sterling Innovations was gone, swallowed by a shell company with zero revenue. The collateral he thought secured his position was a fabricated illusion, supported only by a forged public filing. He was holding an empty bag, and the people responsible for the deception were sitting right in front of him. Vargas did not yell. He did not pound his fists on the linen tablecloth or throw the crystal glasses against the mahogany paneling. Predators in his specific line of work do not waste energy on theatrical displays of anger. They calculate their losses and immediately execute their recovery protocols. He reached into his suit jacket and withdrew a thick leather wallet. He extracted a crisp $100 bill and tossed it onto the center of the table to cover his untouched sparkling water. It was a stark, dismissive gesture signaling the end of his professional courtesy. He turned his cold, unblinking focus onto my brother. Declan sat frozen in his chair, the designer watch on his wrist, catching the dim chandelier light. The charismatic entrepreneur persona had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified young man facing a very severe reality. "You have 48 hours," Mr. Vargas said. His voice was a low, resonant rumble that carried the weight of guaranteed consequences. It was the tone of a man accustomed to collecting debts from desperate people. "I hold the commercial lease on that warehouse space you rented in Reno. You are in default. You will vacate the premises by Sunday evening. You will leave the equipment, the servers, and every piece of office furniture behind to satisfy a fraction of the penalty." Declan opened his mouth, his throat working as he searched for a plea for an extension, but the lender raised a single broad finger, silencing him instantly. "If I find a single broken lock, or if a single monitor is missing when my associates arrive to secure the property on Monday morning, things will get incredibly unpleasant for you." Mr. Vargas stated. "I do not hire collection agencies. I handle my delinquent accounts personally. I strongly suggest you do not test my collection methods." Vargas did not wait for an acknowledgement. He turned on his heel and walked toward the exit. His heavy footsteps thudded against the carpet. He pulled the brass handle and stepped out into the quiet corridor. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving his abandoned water glass and the $100 bill resting on the table as the only proof he had ever attended the celebration. The sound of the latch engaging triggered a frantic reaction from the other side of the table. Mr. Gower snapped out of his stunned paralysis. The polished corporate attorney recognized that sitting in a room with active fraudsters was a direct threat to his livelihood. Mr. Adler had laid out the terms of engagement, promising swift civil litigation and a referral to the State Bar Association. Gower had spent 2 decades building a lucrative practice in Las Vegas, catering to affluent clients who required discreet estate planning. He was not going to risk his license to defend a forged document. Gower reached for his leather briefcase. His hands, previously smooth and confident, now trembled visibly. He grabbed the thick partnership agreement, the very document he had intended to use to strip me of my inheritance, and shoved it haphazardly into his bag. The premium paper crumpled against the brass hinges. "Victoria," Gower said, his voice tight and breathless, "I am formally terminating our attorney-client relationship, effective immediately." Victoria looked at him, her eyes wide with fresh panic. "You cannot leave us right now. We retained you to handle this negotiation. You drafted those papers." "I drafted a contract based on the fraudulent information you provided," Gower corrected her, snapping his briefcase shut. He did not bother to smooth his silk tie or adjust his cuffs. The desire to flee overrode his need to project authority. "You assured me your daughter was a willing participant. You failed to disclose the existence of an independent corporate trustee, and you presented a forged public filing as legitimate collateral. My firm cannot represent individuals engaged in active financial crimes." He grabbed the handle of his bag and stood up, backing away from the table as if the chairs themselves were contagious. "Do not contact my office," Gower instructed, pointing a shaking finger at my mother. "If you attempt to call me, I will instruct my receptionist to forward your information to the authorities. You are entirely on your own." He turned and rushed toward the door, pushing it open with far less grace than Mr. Vargas had displayed. He disappeared into the hallway, fleeing the wreckage without looking back. The private dining room, designed to host boisterous celebrations and lucrative corporate mergers, felt vast and hollow. The silence settled over the remaining 4 of us, thick and heavy. Mr. Adler stood quietly behind my right shoulder, an unmoving sentinel projecting secure authority. I remained seated at the foot of the table, my hands resting near my manila folder, watching the final act of the tragedy unfold. Victoria and Declan were left entirely alone in the spectacular ruin of their own scheme. The allies they had hired to intimidate me had abandoned them, driven away by the undeniable proof of their deceit. They had no legal counsel to shield them. They had no private equity to fund their illusions. They only had the staggering debts they had accumulated and the terrifying deadline the lender had just imposed. Victoria looked at the empty chairs. She looked at the spilled water soaking into the white linen tablecloth. Then she buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders began to shake. A low, rhythmic sobbing echoed in the quiet room. She wept, the sound escalating into a dramatic, breathy performance. I recognized the cadence of her tears immediately. Growing up, I had watched her deploy this exact display whenever she exceeded our household budget and needed my father to cover her extravagant credit card bills. She would sit at the kitchen island, cover her eyes, and cry until his frustration melted into tired compliance. It was the hollow, performative cry of a narcissist who had definitively lost her supply. She was not weeping out of remorse for attempting to steal her daughter's future. She was not crying because she recognized the profound moral failure of forging a signature. She was weeping for herself. She was mourning the loss of her social status, the impending collapse of her carefully curated image, and the terrifying realization that she would have to face the consequences of her actions without a safety net. Declan stared at his mother. He did not reach out to comfort her. He slumped back in his chair, his posture defeated. He looked around the luxurious mahogany-paneled room, staring at the vintage wine bottles displayed behind the tempered glass. The reality of his situation was settling into his bones. By Sunday evening, he would lose his warehouse, his equipment, and the facade of being a successful tech entrepreneur. He would be reduced to nothing, stripped of the unearned arrogance that had defined his entire adult life. I sat and watched the performance unfold. I monitored my internal response, searching for any trace of the guilt that used to control me. For 18 years, my mother's tears had acted as a command, compelling me to fix whatever problem she had created. Whenever she cried, I felt a deep instinctive urge to smooth over the conflict, to apologize for things I had not done, and to sacrifice my own comfort to restore the peace in our home. Sitting in the steakhouse surrounded by the debris of their ambush, I felt nothing. My clinical detachment had immunized me against the guilt trips. The buffer I had constructed in my dorm room held firm, a solid concrete wall separating my emotions from their manufactured crisis. I observed them with the objective clarity of an auditor reviewing a bankrupt ledger. They were overdrawn. Their emotional accounts were empty, and their financial accounts were toxic. I watched gravity pull the fraudulent structure down. A healthy family supports its members, building a foundation on mutual respect and honesty. A parasitic system relies on deception, constantly extracting resources from the most vulnerable person in the room until there is nothing left to take. Victoria and Declan had built their entire survival strategy around my perceived weakness. They assumed my love for them would blind me to the math. They were wrong. The tears continued to flow from Victoria, her sobs echoing in the enclosed space. She peeked through her fingers, glancing in my direction, waiting for me to break the silence. She expected me to offer a compromise, to suggest a smaller loan, or to promise that I would find a way to help them navigate the wrath of the private lender. She was waiting for the lifeguard to throw the life preserver. I offered nothing. I sat in the stillness, allowing her to experience the profound discomfort of a failed manipulation. The silence was my final verdict. It communicated that the bank was permanently closed, and no amount of theatrical weeping would ever reopen the vault. The transaction was over. Victoria continued to weep into her hands, the sound filling the hollow spaces of the private dining room. She was waiting for the familiar rhythm of our dysfunctional dance to resume. In the past, her tears were the cue for me to surrender, to rush forward and offer concessions, to prioritize her comfort over my own security. I sat at the foot of the table, listening to the performance, and realized the music had finally stopped. I felt no urge to comfort her. The emotional leverage she had wielded for 18 years possessed no more power over me. I placed my hands on the edge of the table and pushed my chair back. The wooden legs glided smoothly over the thick carpet. I stood up. The vertical movement shattered the stasis in the room. Victoria gasped, her hands dropping away from her face. The theatrical sobbing ceased in an instant. Her mascara had smudged slightly near the corners of her eyes, but her gaze was sharp, terrified, and entirely focused on my posture. She watched as I reached for the center button of my tailored navy blazer, slipping it through the buttonhole with deliberate, unhurried precision. I gathered my plain manila folder, the one containing the forensic evidence of their fraud, and slid it securely into my leather tote bag. Mr. Adler mirrored my intent. He stepped back from my chair, creating a clear, unobstructed path toward the heavy mahogany doors. He held his pristine leather portfolio at his side, a silent guardian ready to escort his client out of a hostile environment. "What are you doing?" Victoria asked. Her voice cracked, stripped of its aristocratic polish. It was a raw, frantic sound. "I am leaving," I replied. I hoisted the tote bag onto my shoulder, adjusting the strap. The dinner has concluded, and there is no further business to discuss. Victoria stood up so fast she nearly tripped over the hem of her emerald dress. She abandoned all remaining pride. The sophisticated Las Vegas matriarch dissolved, replaced by a desperate debtor watching her final asset walk away. She rushed around the edge of the long table, stepping over the spilled water pooling on the floorboards. She reached out her hands, trembling, aiming to grasp my arm. Mr. Adler subtly shifted his stance, interposing his shoulder just enough to deter physical contact. Victoria halted, her fingers curling into tight fists at her sides. "Lorelei, you cannot just walk out that door," she pleaded. The tears welling in her eyes were no longer a calculated performance. They were born of genuine, suffocating panic. "You heard what that man said. He is going to seize your brother's warehouse. He is going to call the district attorney. We have no liquid capital left to appease him." Declan remained seated, his head bowed, his eyes fixed on the empty crystal champagne flutes. He lacked the courage to even look at me. His silence was a profound admission of his own inadequacy. He had played the role of the visionary entrepreneur, but when the margin calls arrived, he hid behind his mother's skirts. "We will lose the house." Victoria continued, her pitch rising higher. "We will lose everything we have built. The scandal will ruin our name in this city. How are we supposed to survive this? Tell me how we are supposed to survive without the trust distribution." She was searching for a loophole, a final drop of pity she could extract to save herself from the consequences of her own forgery. She invoked the concept of survival, hoping to trigger my deeply ingrained instinct to protect my family. But my definition of family had fundamentally changed. A true family does not forge a signature to pledge a daughter's future to a hard money lender. I looked at her, studying the frantic pulse visible in her neck, and delivered the core thematic truth of the entire journey. "You survive the way everyone else does." I stated, my voice steady and unyielding. "You earn it honestly, or you face the consequences." Victoria flinched as if I had struck her. The concept of earning salvation honestly was entirely foreign to her operating model. She had spent her adult life insulating herself from consequences, utilizing my father's wealth and my presumed compliance as a shield against reality. "You have operated under a profound moral hazard," I explained, maintaining the clinical detachment of a financial auditor finalizing a bankrupt ledger. "You assumed I would always serve as the ultimate underwriter for your bad decisions. But the trust fund is not a bailout mechanism. It is a secured legacy, and it will not be spent satisfying predatory debt you accrued through deception." "Your father would be ashamed of you," Victoria hissed, deploying her weapon of last resort. She tried to leverage his memory, attempting to inflict a wound deep enough to halt my departure. He would never turn his back on his own blood. I felt a brief fleeting sting, but the buffer held firm. I knew my father better than she ever did. My father established a Nevada dynasty trust specifically because he anticipated this exact scenario, I countered calmly. He knew you would burn through whatever liquid assets he left you, and he knew Declan lacked the discipline to build anything sustainable. He locked my inheritance behind a corporate trustee to protect me from you. I am merely honoring his structural design. Victoria had no rebuttal. The truth dismantled her final defense. She stood trembling in the dim light, realizing the reservoir had run permanently dry. I reached into my blazer pocket and retrieved a slim leather card holder. I opened it and extracted a single crisp $50 bill. I stepped forward, bypassing my mother, and placed the currency flat on the white linen tablecloth, setting it down right next to the $100 bill the private lender had abandoned. "What is that?" Victoria whispered, staring at the paper money. "That covers my sparkling water, plus a generous gratuity for the waitstaff," I said. It was a final, precise accounting. I refused to leave that private dining room with a single cent of outstanding obligation. By settling my own tab, I severed the last microscopic thread of financial connection between us. I owed them nothing. I had not consumed their expensive champagne. I had not partaken in their fraudulent celebration. I was walking away with a zero balance. I turned my back on my mother and brother. I did not offer a dramatic farewell or a lingering glance of regret. Looking back implies a hesitation, a reluctance to relinquish the past. I felt no reluctance. I only felt an overwhelming desire to breathe clean air. Mr. Adler reached out and grasped the brass handle of the heavy mahogany doors. He pulled them open, stepping aside to allow me to exit first. I walked over the threshold, leaving the suffocating tension of the private dining room behind. The doors clicked shut behind us, a definitive metallic seal closing the chapter on my role as the Sterling family fixer. We walked down the hushed corridor past the vintage wine displays and merged onto the bustling casino floor of the Aria. The environment was a sensory overload of flashing lights, ringing slot machines, and dense crowds, but it felt remarkably peaceful. The manufactured chaos of the Las Vegas Strip was honest in its intentions. It wanted your money, and it offered entertainment in return. It did not pretend to love you before picking your pocket. I navigated through the labyrinth of gaming tables, my stride steady and purposeful. Mr. Adler walked beside me, his presence a reassuring constant. He did not ask how I was feeling. He understood that the adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, yielding to a profound, quiet exhaustion. We reached the main entrance and stepped through the sliding glass doors into the Nevada night. The evening air greeted me crisp and incredibly clean against my skin. The desert wind carried a faint trace of heated asphalt and ozone, clearing the stagnant, heavy atmosphere of the steakhouse from my lungs. The neon lights of the surrounding resorts painted the sky in brilliant hues of violet and gold, illuminating the city in a vibrant, artificial dawn. I stood on the curb waiting for the valet to retrieve my sedan. I looked up at the towering glass facades, and a sudden, profound realization settled over me. The vast burden I had been carrying for the past year was gone. For months, I had lived with a persistent low-grade anxiety, a quiet dread regarding the impending financial collapse of my household. I had spent countless hours monitoring delinquent tax notices, evaluating Declan's failed ventures, and anticipating the day Victoria would finally demand my intervention. I had operated under the assumption that their survival was my inherent responsibility. Standing on the pavement, feeling the cool desert breeze, I recognized the truth. I was no longer an asset on my family's toxic ledger. I was a free woman with a secured future. The heavy chain of conditional love had been severed by an irrevocable contract and a single, unyielding boundary. I had confronted the people who attempted to exploit me, and I had dismantled their scheme using the very laws they had hoped I would ignore. I did not need to rescue them, and I did not need to punish them. I did not burn the family down. I did not ignite the flames of the private lender's wrath or orchestrate the failure of Declan's shell companies. They had constructed their own pyre through years of arrogance, entitlement, and greed. All I did was refuse to stand in the center of the room when the match was struck. I simply stepped out of the way and let the flames they set consume them. The valet pulled my used sedan up to the curb, the headlights cutting through the evening shadows. He stepped out holding the door open. I turned to Mr. Adler. We shared a brief silent nod, an acknowledgement of a successful defense. I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. The leather felt cool and familiar under my palms. I merged onto the vibrant artery of Las Vegas Boulevard, driving away from the wreckage, driving toward a morning that belonged entirely to me. 6 months passed. The transition from the mild desert winter to the searing heat of the Nevada summer mirrored the shift in my own life. The suffocating pressure of my family's impending ruin had evaporated, replaced by the steady, predictable rhythm of a well-managed ledger. I sat at a corner table inside a quiet coffee shop situated miles away from the neon glare of the Strip. The air conditioning hummed a low, constant note, a steady vibration that felt like a pulse. The scent of roasted espresso beans grounded me in the present moment, a sharp contrast to the sterile, tense air of the mahogany-paneled dining room where my old life had ended. I opened my laptop, navigating to a pristine spreadsheet that tracked my personal expenditures and projected income. Every cell was formatted perfectly. Every formula verified. The numbers told a story of genuine, sustainable solvency. I had secured a highly competitive summer internship at a premier wealth management firm located in the financial district of Summerlin. The hiring partners did not recognize my last name. They did not care about the legacy of my father's logistics company. They evaluated my application based on the merit of my academic portfolio, my understanding of market liquidity, and my clinical approach to risk assessment. I earned the position through rigorous interviews and objective data. Walking into that glass-fronted lobby on my first day, carrying a simple leather portfolio, felt like crossing a finish line I had drawn for myself. The victory belonged entirely to me, untainted by the shadows of my family's chaotic history. I earned my seat at the table using the currency of competence. I had not spoken a single word to Victoria or Declan since the heavy doors of the steakhouse clicked shut behind me. Silence is a profound insulator. When you stop engaging with individuals who view your existence as a transactional asset, the resulting quiet feels expansive. I did not monitor their social media profiles or reach out to mutual acquaintances for updates. In the realm of finance, public records eventually tell the entire story without requiring a single phone call. I preferred to read the official filings, treating their downfall as a distant case study in corporate negligence. The implosion of Sterling Innovations occurred with the precise mechanical efficiency I had anticipated. The private lender, Mr. Vargas, executed his recovery protocols exactly as he had promised. He did not file polite grievances. He seized the leased commercial warehouse in Reno before the weekend concluded, securing the physical assets Declan had foolishly assumed were his own. Without access to fresh capital or the illusion of my trust fund acting as a guarantor, the holding company collapsed. The corporate shell dissolved into a tangled web of outstanding liabilities. Public dockets revealed the inevitable conclusion. Sterling Innovations filed for Chapter 7 liquidation. A court-appointed trustee systematically dismantled the operation, auctioning off the leased servers, the office furniture, and the fragmented pieces of Declan's unearned arrogance to satisfy priority creditors. The personal fallout arrived shortly after the corporate ruin. Declan had financed his lifestyle using the fragile equity of his shell companies. When the foundation crumbled, the creditors arrived to reclaim their property. His luxury sports car, the vehicle he used to project effortless success while lecturing me on campus, was repossessed in the middle of the night. A recovery agent simply backed a tow truck into his driveway, hitched the axle, and drove the collateral away while the neighborhood slept. The designer Italian loafers and the sapphire crystal chronograph could not halt the relentless machinery of debt collection. He was reduced to the stark reality of his own balance sheet, facing a future where he could no longer purchase the illusion of wealth using stolen time. He was forced to learn the harsh mathematics of consequence. Victoria faced a similar, unyielding accounting. The residential balloon payment she had weaponized in our kitchen was in reality the final margin call on a long history of reckless leverage. She had exhausted her credit lines funding Declan's illusions and maintaining a facade of country club affluence. The lenders did not care about her curated image or her status among the wives of casino executives. They cared about the outstanding principal. The bank initiated formal foreclosure proceedings on the Henderson estate, the house where my father had taught me how to read vendor contracts. The kitchen island where Victoria had slid the fraudulent commercial guarantee toward my coffee mug was reclaimed by the lien holders. Victoria could not charm the underwriting department into granting an extension. She was forced to vacate the property, watching strangers place a generic lockbox on the front door. To escape the severe social embarrassment and the aggressive pursuit of unsecured creditors, Victoria relocated across the state line. Public address registries indicated she downsized into a modest, cramped apartment in a quiet working-class town in Arizona. She was stripped of her silk robes, her vintage champagne, and the curated environment she used to manipulate her audience. The audience was gone. The performance had ended. She was left alone in a small room, forced to confront the quiet, undeniable truth that she had engineered her own exile. I reviewed the final cells on my personal spreadsheet, observing the steady, upward trajectory of my savings. I closed the laptop. The screen went dark, reflecting my own face in the polished glass. I looked calm. I looked rested. The profound exhaustion that had haunted me during the final months of living in that house had vanished, replaced by the clarifying energy of true autonomy. We are conditioned to believe that family is an unbreakable contract, a mandatory obligation that requires us to absorb infinite amounts of damage in the name of loyalty. Society expects the responsible child to endlessly bail out the reckless ones, labeling us selfish if we refuse to sacrifice our own stability to cushion their fall. But financial auditors know the truth about toxic assets. You cannot save a failing enterprise by pouring clean capital into a structurally compromised foundation. You only guarantee that the entire structure collapses, taking you down into the rubble. If your family treats your love like a line of credit, it is time to close the account. Setting a boundary isn't revenge. It's an audit of the truth. You do not owe anyone your future simply because they share your last name. You do not owe a rescue to people who intentionally set the fire. Stepping away from the flames is the most rational, healthy decision a person can make. I chose my own survival over their comfort, and in doing so, I preserved the legacy my father actually intended for me. The peace I feel sitting in this coffee shop watching the desert sun cast long shadows across the pavement is the dividend of that choice. If you have ever found yourself staring at a ledger filled with emotional debts you never agreed to incur, or if you have ever had to resign as your family's fixer to save your own life, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below and share the moment you finally recognized your own value. Your boundary might be the exact blueprint someone else needs to escape their own unhinged dynamics. Thank you for walking through the math with me. Keep your receipts safe, trust your own instincts, and I will see you in the next audit.
In the neon-drenched shadow of Las Vegas, a city built on the shimmering illusion of easy fortunes and calculated risks. The most profound gambles often happen far away from the casino floor. They happen at kitchen islands, across mahogany dining tables, and in the quiet spaces between a mother and her daughter. The story of Lorelei Sterling is on its surface a chilling financial thriller about a stolen inheritance and a corporate trust. Yet when we strip away the legal terminology and the dramatic boardroom showdowns, we are left with a profoundly personal mirror reflecting the very heart of modern American family dynamics. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable realities of parenting, family responsibility, and the generational guidance we owe our children. In modern society, it is dangerously easy to confuse the core value of a family with its material shell. We live in a culture that frequently equates visible success with moral virtue. We see this tragically embodied in Victoria and Declan. They are draped in silk, wearing designer chronographs, and desperately clinging to the fading prestige of country club memberships, even as their financial foundation rots beneath them. This represents a complete loss of self to the vortex of materialism. When parents become so tethered to their public image, the traditional family structure warps. The home ceases to be a sanctuary and instead becomes a heavily leveraged asset. More devastatingly, this obsession commercializes love. In the pursuit of maintaining appearances, affection is reduced to a transaction. Familial love morphs into a twisted credit limit where children are subconsciously viewed as backup assets or insurance policies to cover the debts of the previous generation. The cultural mantra that family takes care of family is a beautiful traditional American value. But in the hands of a manipulative parent, it becomes a tool for moral extortion, a way to bind a child to a sinking ship out of a misplaced sense of duty. To prevent this tragedy, parenting must be anchored in 3 foundational pillars: morality, wisdom, and resilience. True morality in parenting dictates that love must never come with an invoice attached. When we raise children, our fundamental responsibility is to nurture an independent life, not to cultivate a financial safety net for our own impending failures. To love a child unconditionally means giving them the wings to fly entirely free of our own burdens. It requires the emotional awareness to recognize when we are using guilt to tether them to our mistakes. Furthermore, true parental morality requires fairness, which sometimes means delivering the harshest form of compassion, the word no. Victoria's continuous financial bailouts of Declan's failed ventures were never acts of love. They were a toxic enabling of his worst instincts, nurturing a deep-seated laziness and entitlement. By constantly shielding him from the consequences of his actions, she robbed him of his adulthood. Sometimes the most profound act of love a parent can perform is to step aside and allow their child to face the natural consequences of their own choices. Lorelei's refusal to sign the guarantee was a rejection of the enabling cycle that had poisoned her family. Beyond morality, we must equip our children with wisdom. In this context, wisdom is not merely academic intelligence. It is the clear-eyed ability to see the world exactly as it is stripped of its glittering illusions. Lorelei's late father imparted this exact wisdom. He did not simply leave his daughter a multi-million-dollar trust fund. He left her the tools to protect it. He taught her how to read a balance sheet, how to decipher the fine print of a contract, and how to evaluate people based on their actions rather than their words. Because of this long-term guidance, Lorelei possessed the clarity to see through her mother's counterfeit warmth and emotionally manipulative photographs. Wisdom also encompasses the vital understanding of enough. A healthy family structure requires parents who possess the emotional maturity to accept their own limitations and failures. Victoria's ultimate downfall was rooted in her inability to accept that she had gone bankrupt. Instead of facing reality, she chose the path of forgery and deceit to artificially prolong her vanity. Teaching children emotional awareness means demonstrating how to handle failure with grace, showing them that a quiet, honest life is infinitely more valuable than a lavish, fraudulent one. Finally, guiding a child requires modeling immense resilience. There will inevitably be times when parents stumble, when businesses fail, and when bank accounts run dry. True grit is not found in hiding these weaknesses behind a web of lies or dragging your children into the wreckage. It is found in the courage to humble oneself, admit defeat, and rebuild a simpler life from scratch. It also means teaching children how to construct and defend their own boundaries. When Lorelei established her ironclad legal and emotional perimeter, she demonstrated a phenomenal strength of character. Parents must instill this strength, teaching children that their primary duty is to their own well-being and integrity, not to the dysfunctional demands of their lineage. Ultimately, the most monumental lesson we can take from this saga is the necessity of looking inward. A family only truly functions as a home when each individual takes absolute responsibility for their own life. Lorelei's quiet peace at the end of the narrative, sitting in a coffee shop, emotionally free and financially autonomous, is the hard-earned reward for living in alignment with the truth and refusing to compromise with deceit. To heal a family, one must stop clinging to superficial status. Stop demanding that others sacrifice themselves for your comfort and begin planting genuine seeds of honesty, transparency, and authentic altruism. If you found yourself nodding along, recognizing the subtle, suffocating weight of conditional love, or the painful necessity of drawing a line in the sand with your own blood, you are not alone. These dynamics happen behind closed doors every day. To explore more stories of quiet strength, where everyday people finally stop paying the price for the mistakes of others, please subscribe to our channel, Fluffy Revenge. Join our community, share your own experiences in the comments, and let us continue to shed light on the family secrets that need to meet the daylight. As you reflect on Lorelei's journey, ask yourself about the ledgers kept in your own home. We all inherit something from the people who raised us. Sometimes it is wealth, sometimes it is wisdom, and sometimes it is a debt we never agreed to carry. When the final accounting is done and the house is quiet, what exactly are you passing down to the next generation? Is it a burden disguised as a bond, or is it the ultimate freedom to simply walk away?